myself. Hi everyone. Sorry that holding slide didn't work properly. We normally do our events through Zoom webinars, so I'm still just finding my way with Zoom meetings with this many people. But hi, welcome everybody to All Inclusive Champion Accessible Museums. My name is Rebecca Atkinson. I'm the events programmer at the Museums Association, and I'll be facilitating today. For the benefit of blind and visually impaired attendees, I am a 40-year-old white cis woman with dark hair and glasses. My pronouns are she and her. It's great to see so many people join us today. They're still coming in, so I'm going to start slowly with some basic housekeeping announcements. First of all, we're delighted to have two speech-to-text translators with us today who will be providing closed captioning. To benefit from these, just click the closed captioning option on the menu bar and either select show subtitles for real-time subtitles or full transcript if you want to see the session in its entirety. This is the second time we've run All Inclusive Champion Accessible Museums. We ran a similar one-day conference in Cardiff back in December 2019 with an emphasis on organisational change. And today is a continuation of that really, with discussion around the social model of disability and a focus on workforce as well. We've lots of people signed up today and we'll all be bringing with us various, excuse me, my phone is ringing. How can I make it stop? We're all bringing with us different lived and professional experiences of access and inclusion. We'd like this to be a safe and open space for sharing and having honest discussions. So with that in mind, we'd like to invite attendees to keep their cameras on if possible and they feel comfortable doing so, so we can create a sense of the room as much as possible via, is possible via Zoom. You should, however, keep your mics muted unless asked otherwise to reduce background noise and disruption. The event will remain open and running all day, so you can leave and rejoin at any point. We have chat function available, so although we can't network in person, this is obviously a nice way to introduce yourself to other attendees, respond to the issues raised and share your own experiences. The chat will be made available to speakers and attendees and requests after the event, but if you're unable to access chat through Zoom, then I can send you the transcripts periodically throughout the day. Just feel free to drop me an email, rebecca.atkinson@museumsassociation.org. We're taking questions via Google Docs. That link is available as part of your joining instructions. And I'll be supporting Sarah with taking questions today, so I will pick things up from chat as well. As you can see from the timetable, we have breakout discussions scheduled during 3 of the talks. These are confidential spaces and won't be recorded, and people can engage as much or as little as they want. And can obviously decline to join at all if you don't want to. I will be assigning breakout room 1 to be closed captioned. If I haven't already spoken to you about this and you do require closed captions, then please message me via chat or email to let me know. I think that covers my side of things. So I'm now going to hand over to Sarah to get started.
Welcome. It's so great to see everybody appearing in this space and saying hello in the chat. So my name is Sarah Pickthall and I'm a white mid-50s cis woman with light hair tied back, a black top with floaty sleeves, and I'm wearing green and black rimmed glasses, and my pronouns are she and her. Now I may by the end of the afternoon have to be chairing lying down, so not chairing, sofaing. So please do follow suit. Be comfortable in the space and do what it takes to be present. So I'm a former dancer and television puppeteer, and my hands were the handymen on CITV's Zap for 10 years, and I'm holding them up, one blue hand and one yellow hand. And it was designed for deaf young people, and I come from a deaf family, but enjoyed by 4 million young people. And this was an inclusive high for me. So with deafness in my family, we designed with and for deaf young people as a starting point, and we made a show that was love for all. So what I'd like you to all do now is put your inclusive high project or event or something that you have made or been part of that was really accessible, that you helmed or that you hosted as part of your organization. So let that be our starting point. Pop that project in the chat. So now I'm more known for consultancy and working in diversity and inclusion across arts and culture and heritage. I'm currently working as an inclusion consultant and team coach for a group of museums in Buckinghamshire called COG. I work for the British Council on their Museum Without Walls digital museum platform. And I was part of the team that developed and delivered the wonderful Museums Association Transformers programme. We're going to hear a little bit about that later. So today's focus is distinct from the last MA event, as Rebecca has said. We'll be reconsidering the social model, how disabled lived experiences can form our work, and we'll be shifting disabled representation in the sector as well. And when I use the term disabled, I'm referring to deaf, disabled, and neurodivergent people of all ages. And yes, as the event info has shared, it is true that COVID-19 has disproportionately impacted the lives of disabled people. But these inequalities were evident before COVID-19 hit. And despite many years of making a case, disabled folk still trying to find new ways to encourage cultural spaces to see the light, make the space, get out of the way and get on board, or better still, be on the board. And this is even more important now. There have been some pockets of great inclusive, accessible practice, but not really sat within a pervading strategy that disabled people will progress and thrive in the sector as a fundamental right in a welcoming culture that responds to their needs and requirements. I also want to emphasize something that Baroness Jane Campbell said this time last year, almost to the day, about vulnerability. We are not vulnerable as disabled people. We are in vulnerable situations. And I think there's an important distinction in this respect. There has never been a better time for us to rethink, reshape our offer. Why? Because we are all more vulnerable. We are all unsure, unsteady, and more than a little wakeful. We are all changed. And so we need museums to change, to meet more of us, all of us. We all need to be change makers in this respect, championing inclusivity and accessible museums as allies and accomplices with disabled people. Through the maze of this last year, the sector has found new ways to be meaningful and relevant, and also to respond to its mistakes and misdemeanors using virtual and digital. And whilst being online could give more people access, we know it can also block people too, which is really what we need to explore, working with disabled people to ensure that we blend face-to-face and virtual spaces with informed perspectives moving forward, so we don't end up discriminating and marginalizing more. So it's this I want to harness in you all today, and to encourage you to do this with disabled people in partnership, putting their perspectives right at the heart of what you do. Why? Because as disabled people, we have been about the business of adapting for most of our lives. We are the ones to work with. So after each presentation today, I'm going to ask you to make an action, shift your mindset, move forward, make a connection. There are some great people speaking today and on the delegate list too, who are doing extraordinary work, including non-disabled colleagues who have worked out how to do great inclusive things. Seek them out. And I'm going to be asking you to share your next moves at the end of the day. So I'm so delighted to welcome the great minds and vital lived experiences we have lined up for you today, who are going to share the current state of play and how their ideas around driving change, and also where they're a little bit peeved or pissed off. And that's important to accept too. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to introduce Tony Heaton, Chair of Shape Arts and sculptor extraordinaire, who is a friend and collaborator. My favourite Tony moment was wheeling down the Turbine Hall at Tate Modern in a project working with disabled artists and architects called Architecture Inside Out. Go find that project. And I think that was over a decade ago. Tony, I'm going to hand over to you, and Tony's going to share new insights on the social model of disability. Thanks, everybody.
Oh, that's lovely, Sarah. Thank you. I hope you can hear me all right. And it's great to be with everybody today. So thank you for inviting me. And I should say that I'm an old white man with a grey beard and glasses. I'm a wheelchair user. and I'm speaking to you from the void of whatever this is that we're doing today. But before I begin, I wanted to just say, as Sarah said, I'm the chair of SHAPE, and if you want to know more about the social model, when I finish talking to you, then the social model is available on SHAPE Art's website. You click on the About SHAPE and lots of information about the social model. There's some film, and there's also an easy read version that covers pretty much everything that I'll be talking about today. So check out SHAPE's website if I've left you dazed and confused. Anyway, I'm going to press my start button and I'm going to get off and talk to you. And I'm going to talk briefly today about how the social model of disability changed my life, because that's what it's going to say on this first slide that Rebecca's going to put up for me, please. That's lovely. Okay. So the slide, if we just stay on the first slide. Brilliant. Okay. So this slide tells you that the social model of disability changed my life, but it doesn't tell you how it changed my life. But let me describe what's on the slide. The image is, well, I'll talk about the image in a second, because I really need to just say that I became disabled in 1970. And as a wheelchair rider, I inherited a world that had got no drop curbs. Almost every building had steps up the front of it. Buses completely inaccessible, lifts didn't speak to you. There were no textured pavings or ramps. And if you wanted to get on a train, they loaded you into a goods van, which is what the image on this slide is. It's a goods van. It's essentially a wooden shed on wheels, and it's set on some rail tracks. It had no windows, no toilet, no heating. And you were basically rolled into a metal cage with all the mail bags. And you lived in hope that when you got to your destination, someone would open the big locked doors and heave you out of it. And of course, back in the day, disabled people were routinely patronized, locked away in institutions. And while we were hidden away, those with power and rank, the non-disabled, continued to create structures and systems that excluded us. And then something turned it on its head. And of course, that was the social model of disability. And Mike Oliver, who coined the phrase, argued that the social model is a practical tool. It's not a theory, it's not an idea or a concept. The social model demonstrates that the problems disabled people face are largely the result of social oppression, exclusion, and not their individual deficits. So let's go to the second slide, please, Rebecca. Okay, so there we go. What is it? Well, I can simplify the social model within these 3 bullet points that are up on the slide. So the social model defines disability as a social construct. It asks the question, where is the problem? And it locates it in the social organization, people's attitudes, or the environment, not in the individual's impairment. And the third point says that it identifies barriers in discrimination as a cause of disability. And it really is that simple. But my challenge to you is, why are we still talking about it instead of doing it? Okay, next slide. So here's me talking about it 35 years ago. So I'm back in 1987 here. This is the handsome young guy in the wheelchair has morphed into me. What a shock. But what you'll see behind is the Harris Museum and Art Gallery. And what it says on this slide is from a press cutting. It says, Tony's floored by the Harris exhibition. And basically, this is a 100-year-old classical building that the powers that be in 1987 decided to build an inaccessible mezzanine floor. And when I went back into the Harris Museum to look at the next exhibition, I found that I couldn't see it because it was on an inaccessible mezzanine floor. And that's when my activism started. So let's hit the next slide. So 5 years later, this is 1992, and in the image it says, good, another press cutting. And the image from the press cutting shows a drum. It's a stone drum, and on it, it says wave and rock. And there is an image of a wheelchair user rolling around the drum instead of going down the steps at the other side that's just out of the picture. And this was the practical application of good physical access and a brilliant sculptural design by the great sculptor Ian Hamilton Finlay. And it's sympathetic to the architecture rather than a bolt-on pneumatic hoist or something like that. Let's hit the next slide. Hit the next slide, Rebecca. Thank you. And of course, we're talking about In Through the Front Door. This again is in 1992. And this is his front cover of book written by Jane Earnscliffe. And of course, In Through the Front Door is exactly what we meant, equal access, the same as everybody else. And of course, that ramp I just showed you is a better practical solution and more creative than a platform lift that breaks down or needs servicing, or often it's a part that has to be ordered from China or Sweden or Switzerland or wherever it is. It takes months to arrive and it makes the museum inaccessible in the meantime. And trust me, this happens all the time. And I want you to remember that it's also important to remember that the social model and access are intrinsically linked. They go hand in hand. Okay, next slide, please. There's two images on this slide. It shows disabled people protesting and bringing traffic to a halt outside Parliament Square. And it also shows a banner saying nothing about us without us. And that was a slogan used by disabled activists. It challenged the prevailing culture that saw disabled people as passive recipients of care. And of course, that's an easy mistake for those with power and rank to make. The first anti-discrimination legislation didn't come about without a huge amount of lobbying and protest from disabled people like the ones in this slide. And of course, without going into 50 years of disability rights politics, it's safe to say that the social model evolved as a challenge to the prevailing medical model, which saw disability as an individual tragedy rather than a social issue that can be addressed by societal change. So we're going to look at that on the next slide, please. This slide illustrates the medical model. Hang on, let's get the slide up. Yep, this slide illustrates the prevailing medical model of disability, and you will see what it says right at the center is the problem is a defective person. I'll read the slide. It says they can't use their hands, can't walk, they need help, can't think, can't hear, needs doctors. And that was the prevailing situation. It was left to medicine to try and fix the problem. So essentially, society recognized the problem, but effectively said, it's not our problem. And of course, you'll still find this problematic thinking in a lot of the structures and systems that exist today. So let's go to the social model slide next. Next slide, please. Okay, so social model, right at the center, it says the problem, a disabling world, poor job prospects, maybe because of segregated education, prejudiced attitudes from people that you come in contact with, lack of accessible communication systems, badly designed buildings, no lifts, poverty, usually because people are living on benefits. And what Mike Oliver said was that the social model is a practical tool. It's not a theory or a concept, but it demonstrates that the problems disabled people face are the result of social oppression and exclusion, not their individual deficits. But of course, the reality is not quite as simple as that. Without medical intervention, I wouldn't be here to speak to you today. And I'm sure lots of you have benefited from medical intervention. But for our purposes today, I think it's enough to understand that to facilitate inclusion of disabled people, we're going to have to adopt social model thinking if we're going to make positive changes to incorporate, what we might say is a creative case for diversity into our galleries and our museums. And the social model was really thought up by Vic Finkelstein and Mike Oliver way back in the 1970s, early 1980s, and it was radical at the time in challenging this individual medical model. Okay, next slide, please. What it says on the screen is a question that was set in the OPCS, the Office for Census and Population Surveys. And I'll read it out. It's written in a medical model format. And it says, are your difficulties in understanding others mainly due to a hearing problem? And then if we rewrite it, in the purple text, in a social model way, what we might write instead is, are your difficulties in understanding people mainly due to their inability to communicate with you? So kind of turning it on its head. And if we go to the next slide, please. The OPCS question said, does your health problem, disability, prevent you from going out as often or as far as you would like? And of course, if we look at it from a social model perspective, that would read, what is it about the local environment that makes it difficult for you to get about in your neighborhood? I hope that's made sense. I mean, to put it crudely, what the medical model says is what's wrong with you, and what the social model is saying is what is it that stops you doing things? Okay, so I guess the insidious part of that is when you go on to analyze the data that you've collected, what that does, if we look at the medical model questioning, is that it reinforces the medical model and assumptions that disabled people are defined by their impairments, rather than realizing from the data that actually a large part of the population are disabled by poor design, bad architecture, discriminatory attitudes, and exclusive services. And that distinction is really important when we consider that around 20% of the population are actually disabled people. Okay, next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. Okay, so we use the term disabled person, disabled people, because if you use the social model as your framework for understanding the issue, then it means I'm disabled by an inaccessible environment or an inaccessible building, or information is given to me in the wrong format. And of course, then the disabling part is what is done and how it's done. So yes, I use a wheelchair. Yes, I have an impairment. The thing that disables me as a wheelchair user is steps, high curbs, cobbled streets, essentially bad architecture and poor public realm planning. Okay, next slide. So far, so good. And this slide shows disabled people protesting for civil rights. And these disabled people holding up banners, rights not charity, disabled people fight back. And of course, we're talking about rights and inclusion here, not charitable attempts to integrate. And these are from many years ago, but they could be equally pertinent today when we look at the erosion of our rights with the current age of austerity. And so the social model really should be our guide in our thinking and problem solving. And I really urge you to start using the social model as your baseline. Okay, next slide. We're going to look at some examples now of how you might use the social model, or how the social model could have been helped the situations in these next slides. Okay. So to describe this slide, sorry, go back to that slide, please, Rachel. So to describe this slide, this is the Ghent, this is in Ghent in Belgium, and it's the Design Museum. And what you can see in the image, there's a ramp, there's a stepped entrance up the front, and there's a ramp to each side. And we know that the person here has not thought about the social model of disability, because what they've done is they've put two portable A-frames right on top of the ramp at each side, which effectively blocks wheelchair access. And it's a trip hazard for any white cane user. So the architects actually designed an accessible entrance, and somebody in management inside has ruined that by a management intervention. Okay, let's look at the next slide again, where access has not been well thought through. This is in the Picasso Museum in Paris. It was closed for 5 years. They spent 30 million euro on refurbishing it. And when I went in the lift, these images on this slide are what I was presented with. So I came out of the lift in the left-hand slide. I went down a very long corridor ramp. And on the right side, you can see the ramp as I went round the corner. Let's flick to the next slide, please. And then when I went round this ramp, I'm confronted with a set of stairs going down the other side. It could have been really dangerous if I'd have been rolling down at speed or not taking any notice, because there's no change in texture on this pavement, on these steps either. So you've no idea what's going on. Let's have a look at the next slide. Okay, the next slide is still in the Picasso Museum, and this is about curating an interpretation. And somebody's put a shelf at a very high height, and in the image, there's a young boy trying to look at what's on the top of this shelf, and he simply can't see what's on there. Let's go to the next slide. And here's me. I can't see what's on top of this shelf either. I know there's some little Picasso sculptures, but I'm really frustrated that I can't see them. And this person who has curated this exhibition has clearly not used the social model in thinking about setting it out. Let's look at the next slide. Again, just to describe the slide, there's some striped floor here. It indicates a ramp. The interpretation is situated in a place that means for a wheelchair user, you can't read it going up the ramp. You can't read it face on because the object's in the way, and you can't see it from the other side because there's a white step, which is in the image on the right, that stops you getting up to see it. So you're kind of blocked from all sides, really. Let's hit the next slide. I don't want to dwell on too much not thought about the social model here, but clearly nobody's thought about the social model. There's a high bookshelf with heavy box files and a lectern right at the top of these 3 high shelves. Unless you're 6 foot tall, you're really not going to be able to lift one of those box files out and put it on the top of that lectern and look what's in it. I couldn't use it, a child couldn't use it, and certainly anybody that's less than 5'6" wouldn't be able to use it. Let's hit the next slide. Again, in this next slide, there's a couple of fixed seat structures, very sharp edges, and the audio units right at the back of them, and a wheelchair user wouldn't be able to get down that gap, wouldn't be able to into a place where they could use the audio, and there's no interpretation of what's on the audio, so no access to any deaf visitors. I think I'll skip the next slide, but I mean, just slip past it. Sorry, going in the other direction. Yeah. Next one, please. Yeah, let's hit some good news. Okay, and this good news is the inside of the Being Human exhibition, which is the new exhibition at the Wellcome Collection. And this came about, and the reason that I'm going to describe the slide is that it's a beautiful big open space. There's a lot of colour contrast on the walls, the ceilings, the floors. You can see a lot of space to move around the exhibits and lots of colour contrast. So let's drill down into this image when I've just said a little bit more about it, because I got involved with the Wellcome through the Research Centre for Museums and Galleries at Leicester University. And I was invited in as a consultant because the RCMG were invited in by Wellcome to help them to develop and design this new proposition. And they wanted to be really ambitious at the Wellcome because this was going to be a new permanent gallery exploring contemporary health and medicine. And one of the big questions for the Wellcome was, how can we avoid dehumanizing portrayals of disabled people? But how can we actively challenge deeply entrenched negative perceptions of disability? And also, what role might the Wellcome play in fostering a new understanding of disability and to open up possibilities for respect, equality, understanding? And we started work from the starting point was actually the social model of disability. That was going to be our guide all the way through the work that we did. And we worked for 18 months on getting this exhibition up and running. So let's hit the next slide, please. I'm sure many of you will have been to see this exhibition at the Wellcome. And to describe this slide, there is some ceramic objects in a case, but there is a tactile object describing one of the pieces in the display case. So it's tactile, you can touch it, and there's interesting interpretation from a user point of view as well as from a curatorial point of view. Let's hit the next slide. So the next slide shows lots of space under the plinth for a wheelchair user to get their legs underneath. The interpretation panel is set at an angle that makes it easy to see from either a standing position or a seated position, and plenty of color coordination. Let's hit the next slide. I want to quote Richard Sandell, who's the co-director at the Research Centre for Museums and Galleries, because I thought what he said described the images that are on this slide. And he said the convention to put benches central to wall-mounted screens or text objects, was a convention that positions wheelchair users as second-class citizens who can only watch physically and symbolically from the margins. And what he wanted the Welcome to do was respond, and they responded by positioning the seating so that a wheelchair user could occupy that central space equally with a non-disabled colleague, so they could enjoy the content alongside each other. And what the slide shows is a beautifully colored contrasted seat in yellow and a blue back wall with the film showing. And the picture on the right shows a wheelchair user and a colleague sat side by side, but occupying that central space. And he said the subtle shift in design communicated something to all visitors. And it created a rare example of a public space in which disabled people's rights, the right to fully access and experience culture, were taken seriously. And I'd say that it's also a really simple and no-cost paradigm shift that anybody can put in. Okay, let's have a look at the next slide. And I thought with inaccessible exhibitions and excluding galleries opening every year, this article from the New York Times was very pertinent. And if I read the slide, it says, is this the world's most accessible museum? Those without disabilities might not notice the innovations, but a museum in London is winning plaudits for its design and content. And Being Human opened in September 2019. In the first 4 months, it had 250,000 visitors, 25% more visitors year on year than the previous gallery, and importantly, 12% declared themselves to be disabled, compared to a 5% average amongst benchmarked institutions. So more disabled people going to look at it. And Richard concluded by saying that it's an insight into how museums and galleries can be transformed when disabled people, their insights, experience, and expertise are placed at center stage. Okay, penultimate slide. And we couldn't talk about disability without talking about toilets. And this is a slide image of a Changing Places toilet. And I urge you all to look on your whatever web browser to look at what Changing Places toilets are all about. But this facility has widened access for a whole group of disabled people who face multiple disadvantage when allied facilities are not present or accessible. So this is really important. And the RCMG also produced with the Welcome a really handy document. It's called An Ethical Approach to Interpreting Disability and Difference. And I really recommend that document to you. You'll find it on the RCMG website, An Ethical Approach to Interpreting Disability and Difference. Okay, the last slide. Phew. Hit the last slide, Rachel. There we go. Okay, so what it says on the slide is always remember the disabled person usually knows the best way to manage their situation. So if you don't know, just ask. Don't make assumptions. Don't think we're all the same, because we're not. And as Sarah alluded to, you know, the human animal is very adaptive. The COVID pandemic is proving that. And the social model isn't difficult. Remember those 3 bullet points? We just need to do it. Be adaptive. You know, live the social model. It needs to be part of your organizational DNA. And everybody at every level in the museum or gallery needs to own it. It's just like programming or marketing or governance or budgeting. It needs to be right there in your mission and vision. Everybody can champion it, and you've got to use it all the time. It's your power for full inclusion, and you can go forth and create positive change in our new inclusive world that we're all looking forward to building. So thank you for listening to me, and go to Shape's website if you want to know more about the social model. It's on Shape website page under, I think it's under About Shape. So check it out. Thank you for listening as I droned on for the last 20 odd minutes, and I'm going to shut up, and I'm just in front of time. So thank you very much.
That's so impressive. Oh, brilliant. Yes. So now, and also just to say on that last slide, that was one of Tony's artwork, beautiful artwork. How would you describe that, Tony, briefly?
It's called Great Britain from a Wheelchair, and it's basically an outline map of Great Britain that's constructed out of bits of old wheelchairs.
Yeah, it's
So
wonderful. It's one of my favourites. I think you can see it at Grey Eye
it is.
Theatre, the Bradbury Studios. Yeah.
It is. It's in Grey Eye, hanging on the wall. I love it being at Grey Eye too.
Wonderful. That was just so illustrative, and do that just showing the change and shift within the Welcome exhibition. So we're going to put you into breakout spaces and to find your power. So one thing in relation to the social model of disability, thinking about how you might do something differently, explore what is done, shifting that, something in your spaces and places, and the people you might be needing to talk to. So that last slide, talking to disabled people because they know. So if you can go into your breakout spaces for about 10 minutes max, and then we'll bring you back to pop in the chat one thing that you've shared that you're going to move forward on and rethink it in a social model frame. Okay, anything to add, Tony, to that before we send people away?
I don't think so. I think you've articulated it really clearly. Think about social model, think about what you're going to do differently, but you've got to keep the social model. It's not a one-off. You've got to live it forever now. Okay,
into your breakout room. See you in a little while.
Bye.
Thank you. I'm just going to, I'm muted, sorry. There's a few people that need to go to breakout room 1. I can't find you on my list, so it'd be great if you could just don't enter the breakout room you've been put into, stay in the main room, and then I'll assign you manually, if that's okay. So if you want to be in breakout room 1, where there's closed captioning, just don't join. I'm sorry, I've got my volume coming on my other computer, so sorry. Come back here and I'll put you in manually. I think that's going to work, and apologies. And that's also for our closed captions, you could do that too. Bear with me one moment while I set up the breakout rooms now.
Room as well, so he couldn't have a wee rest. He had to keep on working. Tony, are you back?
Just later in the day, if anyone wants, so this is Rebecca speaking, but if anyone wants to not go into breakout, you can opt to sort of to not join. But yeah, we're filling our way with them.
Yeah. Welcome back, everybody. So your social model move, if you can pop it in the chat, please. If you can pop your social model move. I'm conscious that some of you probably didn't have a chance to speak. It's so short, that breakout space. But speak now in the chat and pop your social model move. Tony, I know you were sent into a breakout space.
I was. I had a wonderful time. Thank you.
Yeah, I had a wonderful time in our breakout space, and all the things that you are planning and wanting to put into social model frames. So pop those in the chat so we can see the full range of what your moves are going to be. So as you're doing that, Tony, I think we've got a little bit of time to have some Q&A together. Now, your Google Doc, you can put in questions on your Google Doc, but what's coming through, there was a nice conversation earlier between Mark and Chloe around listed buildings and innovation around that. It tends to sort of stop people in their tracks. So Mark's call was for how we can be innovative around that. And Pierrette, we were talking in our breakout group about different ways that in Bolton, they were finding ways around these things. So Tony, what would you like to say about this sort of listed building issue?
Yeah, I'd say it's a red herring. And people throw that out when they fold their arms. They go, well, it's a listed building, you know. And actually, all that means is that a listed building can't be demolished or extended or altered without special permission from the local authority planning committee. So it basically means you've got to go through a slightly tighter planning scrutiny. So if you were just changing your house and it's not listed, it would be a relatively straightforward planning application. But for a listed building, just has to go through a special planning system. But there's no reason why listed buildings can't be made accessible. Access really trumps listed buildings every time. If we were stuck in Aspic, we'd still have bird baiting and ducking stools for witches, wouldn't we? I mean, listed buildings can be made accessible. We know that. British Museum, royal palaces. You look round at some amazing listed buildings. Buckingham Palace, wherever it is. A wheelie will be able to get in there, or somebody with a visual impairment will be able to access what's going on. So don't let listed building status stand in your way. The Harris Museum that I showed you in the early slides is a listed building. But we built a ramp around that wonderful drum that Ian Hamilton Finlay designed as a beautiful piece of sculpture. It's made out of exactly the same sandstone as the building. When it was new, it looked pretty shockingly new. But, in a northern climate, after throwing a few buckets of rain down on it and a bit of green moss growing on it, it looked like it had been there for 150 years. Nobody bats an eyelid. People either go down the steps at one side or roll round the ramp at the other. And if you're really observant, you read wave rock and you think, wow, that's poetic. The museum is the rock, the people are the wave crashes into the rock, it changes imperceptibly. It's beautiful poetry, and then what you get in a modern building is an awful platform list, which breaks down all the time. Don't let architects sell you that kind of nonsense. If you've got room, make a ramp, and that's just an obvious piece of access, isn't it? And an obvious solution.
That's brilliant, Tony. Thank you. Your wisdom and insight and, defying. Yes, let's defy the red herrings. Totally. Loving to see all the moves you're making in the chat, examples that just really challenge what you can't do or supposedly can't do, to finding really innovative, interesting ways. Great to see people recommending deaf and disabled, neurodivergent consultants who can support you to, do the journey with you.
Yes.
Tony, thank you so much.
It's my pleasure.
You're just invaluable and you're great.
Lovely to be here.
We're going to move on. Now, please stay with us, Tony, for as long as you can.
I will. I'll finish my gin and tonic.
Okay, yeah, because you didn't have a break there. Go. I am delighted to welcome our next speaker, Hannah Thompson. Hannah, who I've only recently met, but I know she's been working with Vocalize more recently and with lots of other people consulting on how to have best practice for blind and visually impaired people and digital and settings such as these. An academic from Royal Holloway University of London, she started out as a specialist in 19th century French novel, and she's now working in inclusive audio description as an intermodal translation. And I'm really excited with some of the things she's going to share with us today. So I'm going to hand over to Hannah, and over to you.
Thank you. I'm just going to share my screen, and then I'm going to do. I need to make it into full screen, but okay. I'm just going to turn my camera off for a second so that I can do this without grimacing at you guys.
No problem.
Okay. Right. Okay. So thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be speaking to you all today. I'm just going to basically tell you a little bit about myself and why I'm here. So and this on my slides. The slides are really just for background for people. So some of you are very visually dependent, and you need something to look at as you're listening to people talk. I'm referring to the non-blind members of the audience. So that's what my slides are for. I'm going to read them all out. There's not really any images on them. The first one is called My Life in Museums. Now, I'm an academic. I'm not a museum professional. I don't have any of the professional practical experience that you guys do have, but I am an enthusiastic and experienced museum visitor. I grew up with a father who is he was a museums professional. He's now a kind of heritage consultant. And until I was about 18, I thought that what you did at weekends was go to museums. And we do 4 museums every weekend. We do one in the morning on Saturday, one in the afternoon, and then 2 on Sunday. And I also thought that holidays abroad were to do with museums. So we'd pick a destination based on its museums, and then we would visit them all. And it was a real revelation to me when I realized that other people like went swimming and played sports, and so I've got a lot of experience of museums. I'm partially blind, so I spent a lot of my time banging my nose on invisible display cases, accidentally setting off security alarms by getting too close to things, and sitting around feeling frustrated that I couldn't see what all the fuss was about. So then I kind of, carried on into adulthood as an enthusiastic museum visitor, went into academia as a French literature specialist. And in the last 10 years or so, I've kind of rediscovered museums through audio description. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about how I've developed my theory of blindness gain, and then 2 examples of recent projects that I've been working on. So blindness gain, it's a theory that I've adapted from a theory called deaf gain, and there's also a theory called disability gain. And it's kind of a step further than the social model. So the talk on the social model was really important. I'm a different generation, and I want to basically go beyond the social model. So to think about disability as an advantage. So this quotation is about deaf gain, and it defines deaf gain as deaf people's highly visual, spatial and kinetic structures of thought and language may shed light onto the blind spots of hearing ways of knowing. And that's in the an edition of the Disability Studies Reader. That's a quotation. And it basically means that the way deaf people access information, conceptualize concepts and communicate gives all of us, deaf and non-deaf people, different ways of thinking about the world and creative ways of doing so, which can actually benefit everybody. And so my theory of blindness gain is kind of doing the same thing. So moving away from the dominant conception of blindness as a problem, deficit, or lack, it celebrates blindness as a solution, benefit, or gain. So in other words, the things that you do in your museums to make them accessible to blind people are actually things that benefit everybody. So why not use those kind of accessibility tools throughout and always, and see what happens to sighted people's experiences of museums? Or I prefer to call them non-blind people, because that celebrates blindness rather than always putting sight as the default. That's why I say that I'm partially blind rather than partially sighted. I'm also, in my theory, borrowing the words of my favorite blindness studies scholar, Georgina Klieg. And she, like me, is partially blind. And she talks about people gaining blindness rather than losing sight. So I don't really like this vocabulary of vision loss, of kind of, deprivation and deficit. For me, I'm lacking blindness, if you like. I'm on the way towards blindness. I don't position myself in relation to sight. So the problem we have, clearly, and we've had this problem since museums were invented, is that they are all about putting things on display, and putting things on walls, in cabinets for people to look at. And that's pretty much because they've always been designed by and for non-blind people. So that means that even if you include braille and audio description and floor markings, just different textures, you're still basically excluding blind and partially blind visitors and museum professionals, because you're still saying that sight is the most important sense in a museum. It's kind of the basic assumption behind everything a museum does. You know, you put stuff up for people to look at, to read, okay, and then you add extra bits around the edges. But it's a bit like Tony was saying about the different ways that seating is done. It's always stuff added around the edges, okay. And now, as the chat's been showing, and as I know, museums have put a huge amount of work into overcoming this problem, okay, of the visual focus of museums. So audio description, touch tours, tactile modeling, and a lot of inclusive programming exists. And this is the best time in the world to be a partially blind or blind museum visitor. And I want to thank everyone who's done that. It tends to be kind of not very systematic and, you know, kind of sporadic, but there's definitely a lot of really good stuff going on. And what I'm going to do now is kind of suggest how we might take that to another level. So just this quotation, this is another quotation by Georgina Klieg. And I can't actually see the whole of this quotation because the little windows on, I'm going to see if I can move my little window. Oh, I can, excellent. Okay, there we go. So this is a quotation from Georgina Klieg, and it's from a book called More Than Meets the Eye, What Blindness Brings to Art. And if you read one book on blindness in museums, this is the book you should read. And the image on the side is just the front cover of the book. It's got the title and it's got a kind of blurry image behind it. Might be a face, hard to tell. And Georgina says, the hope is that blind people can bring a perspective that has not been articulated before. If we can abandon the notion that blindness can only diminish, damage, or destroy identity, we will move towards a more genuinely inclusive society. The integration of blind perception and experiences will change the foundational assumptions of the culture, change how the human condition is defined. So I want to just really quickly talk about two projects that I've been involved in where I've tried to do just that. So the first one is an audio described tour of the Royal Holloway Picture Gallery, which is hosted on the Smartify app and on their website. And I've put the link to the description on the slide. And I'm hoping that Rebecca can put it in the chat for me. If not, I can do it afterwards. And then the second one is some co-created audio description workshops and that I've been running in Paris with the Musée du Quai Branly. So the audio description at Royal Holloway. So we have an issue with the Royal Holloway Picture Gallery, which is that it's a big 19th century gallery. It's got about 90 pictures in it. Because it's used for weddings and other events, we can't have any labeling. So we needed to find a way to give visitors access to the paintings without putting anything on the walls. So the curator worked with Smartify to develop the kind of Smartify app tour. So what you do is you point your phone at whichever picture, if you're in the gallery, and it gives you information about it, the kind of information you might have on a little label. And we realized that the app has the facility to upload audio files as well as text, and it's really voiceover friendly. It works really well with assistive technology. So I said to the curator, what if we made some audio descriptions of the paintings and uploaded them? And now I believe in creative audio description, which is basically about giving the visitor a creative or aesthetic, artistic response to the picture, rather than a very kind of neutral, objective, kind of traditional description. And that's because looking at pictures is an aesthetic, artistic experience. And so I think it's best captured in kind of subjective, artistic language. So what we did was we asked a range of volunteers from across the college, students, staff, alumni, to record their response to a picture. And I did a little training workshop on creative audio description. And then we put, at the moment there are 15 of these because we kind of got shut down by lockdown. But the brilliant thing about them is that they're on the website, so you can listen to them anywhere, whenever you want. They're available to everyone, so it's not a kind of special thing for blind people that you have to search out or ask for. It's just there. They're all about celebrating the subjectivity of looking and the positionality of looking. So in other words, there are as many ways of seeing a picture as there are people looking at the picture. Okay. You know, going to an art gallery, talking about art is communal, it's collective, it's creative, and that's what these different voices were trying to convey. It's also inclusive and diverse because we've got lots of different people. We wanted to also get away from this hierarchical structure, which says the only people qualified to talk about art are those who've been trained in art history. That felt to us quite alienating, and it didn't feel very inclusive. So that project has led to other people, and I think Ruth Fletcher's here, and she's from the Hunterian in Glasgow, and I worked with her on a kind of follow-up project on her students. So it's already having a bit of a reach, and it's been a really kind of brilliant creative way of celebrating something that started off as an access thing for blind people, audio description, making it part of the online museum experience for anyone who wants to listen to it. Okay, the second project was at the Musée du Quai Branly in Paris, which is a kind of ethnographic museum. And this is a different kind of project, because what we've been doing here is we've been co-creating descriptions of some Aboriginal images using a mixed group of blind, partially blind, and non-blind volunteers. So you might say, well, hang on a sec, how can a blind person write an audio description? Well, what we did was we started off with a partially blind person. So in fact, me and another person, we said what we could see, okay, which in my case isn't very much. And then the blind people in the group kind of asked me questions to try and, like, you know, so they could create their own understanding, their own perceptions. And then the non-blind people came in and asked me things and asked each other things, and so we basically had this huge kind of dialogue conversation, which led, after quite a few Zoom sessions, to these co-created descriptions where we wrote down everyone worked on creating a description which is at once a piece of creative writing, and it's an aesthetic experience in its own right, but it's also an informative and kind of, it gives you all the information you need about the picture. And we tried to make them really multi-sensory, so we didn't just talk about what you can see, because that reinforces the whole, the hierarchy of the senses, which tends to exclude blind people. So we talked about what it might feel like, what it might smell like. We also used movement, so we made them kinetic. We talked about how, what would happen if you moved closer and further away. We talked about the movements the artist might have made. And we also made them creative. So we kind of talked about the artistic process that might have been involved. So all of these things are not normally included in audio descriptions. And we also worked really hard to replicate the gallery experience. Now, I know from all those days that I spent in museums that when you go to a gallery for the first time, let's imagine you're going into a new art gallery, okay? You go into a room, there's, let's say, 20 pictures hanging, okay? You're standing in the doorway, you try to decide where to go next. What you have is an overall impression of each picture. Then you pick one that draws you, that attracts you, you go towards it, you get closer, you start building up detail, you start building up impressions. Then you peer and read the little label that's next to it, which gives you the artist, the title, the date, the medium, the collection history, right? Audio descriptions happen in exactly the opposite order, traditional ones. So the first thing you're told is this is a title, this is a title, this is the medium, this is the date, okay? So all your kind of aesthetic pleasure and artistic interpretation kind of opportunities are shut down completely. because you're told this is a lighthouse. So, you know, you don't get any chance to think, what is that? Is that a person? Is that a, you know, is that a rock? You don't get any of that. You just, it you know, it becomes something objective, and it becomes someone else's view. And mostly 99% of the time, audio descriptions are sighted people telling blind people how to look. And I don't think that's very inclusive. So this is what we're trying to do in Paris. We're trying to kind of break the mold, if you like, for audio description. So we've done all these descriptions are in French, so they're not that helpful if you don't read French, but you can go and listen to them on the website. But I have translated one for you just to give you an example, and this is what we call the first impression. So this is what you would get if you were standing at the doorway of a room, and this is one of several paintings that catches your eye. So on a small vertical painting, there is a large central structure. 9 irregular squares, some covered in diamonds, others in a multitude of straight and wavy lines. Different shades of red, terracotta, copper, saffron, an impression of heat. Our Western perception hesitates. We are perplexed. What is this unknown imagery? Let's move closer and work it out. There's a couple of things before I finish that I wanted to say about this description. The first is how we've dealt with colour. So it's a common misconception that blind people don't like it when sighted people talk about colours. Now, you probably all know that only between about 2 and 4% of blind people are actually have no sight at all. So most blind people can distinguish differences between light and dark and know about colour. Most blind people who visit museums and galleries have acquired blindness. So unlike me, lost or gained their blindness in later life. So they're absolutely completely happy with notion of colour. People like me who have had a very similar eye condition for the whole of my life, I see enough to see colour, but also I live in a world where people talk about colour all the time, okay? Because I live in a sighted world. So I'm, you know, it's fine to talk about colour. It's also fine to talk about perspective and to talk about oil painting and different, you know, people, even if we can't imagine what it looks like, we still understand it as a concept. So that's what we did with the colours. We also tried to use different sense impressions. So saffron is, you know, we wanted to bring in taste, we wanted to bring in touch, and then this impression of heat, because it's a very kind of warm feeling painting. And then the final thing I wanted to say is we mentioned our Western perception. And this is because this is a contemporary native Australian painting, which was given to the gallery by an Australian community. So a lot of the imagery in it isn't accessible to us as Westerners. So we wanted to put that in the description, and it's another way of celebrating the subjectivity of the description. So that's all I wanted to say. Basically, rather than thinking of blindness as a problem to be solved, or thinking about the social model and how you will adapt to blind people, think about celebrating what blindness can bring by including things like creative audio description in what you do for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hannah. In the chat, lots of people really appreciating what you've brought to this discussion, just the layers, that blind and partially blind people being right at the heart of the process, but also that you know, cultural references, and you know what it could mean, and what it gives all audiences to have this really rich connection. I know people have been putting some questions on the Google Doc. I hope so. Rebecca, are there any questions? We'll go a bit earlier to lunch, I think. I realise I didn't give you a break in my excitement. My apologies, that's not very inclusive. But we will go a little earlier to lunch. But anything that you can see there, Rebecca?
Excuse me, and sorry, I've got another laptop going. It keeps turning itself on, the volume, so I'm just going to turn it off again so you don't hear me twice. So there's a question for Hannah here about the how is the dialogue nature of the conversation presented in the audio material produced? That is it dialogue edited or audio guide pre-recorded? That's a question from Paolo. I don't that you can answer that.
The way we did it in the Paris example, we had all the dialogue beforehand, and then we've basically published the text as co-written. So everyone's opinions were taken into account, and we basically worked as a group. In the Royal Holloway example, I think the dialogue comes in when you listen to a range of descriptions, you hear different voices. I had another thought actually. One of my museums near to me has an exhibition on at the moment. It's a temporary exhibition, and they said, you know, this is accessible, and what they meant was there's a ramp, and there isn't any audio description. And what I thought was, what if me and someone else walked around the exhibition and basically just had a conversation about the art, which we recorded and put on the website? That would be a dialogue. It would also be a co-creation. It would immediately make the exhibition accessible to everyone else who comes later. And so that would be another way of capturing dialogue. Quite often when I've gone, because, you know, obviously, as you know, there are lots of audio described tours available for special people like me, and I can book them. And quite often, me and maybe 2 or 3 other blind people are in a gallery, and we have a wonderful curator or access person or educator with us describing things. You can kind of tell that everyone else in the gallery is also listening, okay? Because everyone likes a good audio description. Most people who go to art galleries are not confident with art. And actually, most people who don't go to art galleries don't go because they're not confident with art. But if you had someone telling them, helping them work out where to look and what to prioritize. One time I was there with someone, a friend of mine describing, and someone else kind of chimed in, a stranger, and went, no, I don't think it is that actually. I think it's that. And no, what about? So we ended up having this kind of communal, you know, description amongst strangers. So I think let's just do that. Let's just have conversations in front of artworks.
Yeah, Sarah speaking. I think that's a wonderful idea and actually quite low tech
Mm-hmm.
and illustrative. There was a question here from Wendy about, have you done any work developing these resources for young people, for children and young people, and involving them in this?
No, I haven't. It's interesting actually. In Georgina Klieg's book, she compares the audio guides which are produced for children, for blind people, and for non-blind adults. And she says that she's talking about museums in New York. She says that children's guides and blind people's guides tend to be quite similar, and then non-blind adults get a more sophisticated kind of, a more, you know, kind of more focused on kind of art history, whereas the children's guides and the blind people's guides are more like, how do you think this would make you feel?
Interesting. So more visceral and sensory, which is really what you're, you know, allowing us to experience something in a much sort of richer, more dynamic way. How wonderful. Hannah, we're gonna send people to lunch a wee bit earlier, but what would be great before we did? So I noticed in the chat, in terms of at the beginning, you were saying some those inclusive, accessible projects that you're really proud of, and a lot of those have been around audio description. So in response to Hannah's talk, how might you move this forward? You know, your current work on audio description, or if you're thinking about doing new work, like creating and capturing conversations in your spaces. I mean, how great is that? If you could just share in the chat what Hannah's sharing with us today has moved you on to think about doing next. So if it's okay, pop that in the chat. And Hannah, just to say thank you so much. The chat has shown such appreciation. More and more people really got people thinking, but not about the money so much, about putting blind people central to the process, being more creative and thinking outside of the box, the tick box. So it's just been wonderful you being here with us this morning. So thank you.
Thanks for inviting me. It was a real pleasure to be here.
and hope you can stay on after lunch to enjoy more. Rebecca, over to you. Is it lunchtime now? Do you think that's
I think it's lunchtime, yeah. Yes.
Yes.
So I think everyone needs, it's nice to have a screen break as well. So I'm going to put a holding slide up that just reminds everyone that lunch ends at 3:15, 1300, 1:15, exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, have a break. I mean, the Zoom meeting will remain open, so you want to send chat to people, obviously that's absolutely fine. It will be here, and I'll keep on checking the waiting room as people come in, but otherwise, yeah, go and grab something to eat, have a drink, and have a walk round and think about what we've heard this morning. We'll be back at 1:15.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. I'll share my screen now with the holding slide, just to remind people of that time.
Sarah? Oh, I'll ask you in the chat.
Welcome back, everybody. Oh, seems to be a bit of an echo there.
You got your mic in properly, Sarah, because it's echoing back.
Yeah, no,
Not your mics, your headphones.
yeah, no, that's strange. I feel like it's coming from your end. Is that better? Or is that still echoing?
No, that's fine for me. Is it everyone else? Is that okay?
Sorry about that. That was a bit of a afternoon call in the down section after lunch. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you've had a good break and haven't got lost in your inbox. So now for a really exciting and engaging afternoon. This after lunch slot, we've got two brilliant professional museum people, Rana Ibrahim and Mark Barrett, both of whom I met on the Transformers Diversify programme. And that programme was specifically for people with lived experiences of discrimination working in museums. So I'm going to first start this half an hour by talking to Mark Barrett. He's a freelance autism consultant and also Museums Association rep for the South East of England. So we're just going to, I think, spotlight us both. Mark, for access, can you describe yourself, please?
Hello, yes, my name is Mark. I am a young, devilishly handsome young man with dark eyebrows and dark eyes and dark hair and yeah, short hair with a bit of stubble, distinguished stubble. And yeah, I've got a white and dark striped shirt. And did I say I was handsome?
Yeah, I think you did. Thank you very much, Mark. It's always great to be in conversation with you. So we're going to use this time to talk about change making.
Wonderful. And can I just say it's such a privilege to be talking on this platform. It feels like a lifetime ago since I was still green-cheeked coming to you as a novice change maker, Sarah. Yeah, so we're my experience of being a change maker and what it means to me. I was a trainee at Colchester and Ipswich museums, and to cut a long story short, I was quite new to museums, and it's not until I met Jess, who ran the programme, I got onto Transformers Diversify, and that was all about being a change maker. It was through that obviously the journey started. So change making in Transformers terms is all about making that radical change within your organization based on diversity and inclusion. And especially this was all in light of the Museums Change Lives campaign that the MA ran. So that was like our Bible per se in order to advocate and to make those changes. But the way we make those changes and how we do it was the question.
Yeah, absolutely. And what does it mean to you, Mark, change making? I mean, having, you know, you really are, this is everything that you do is about challenging and changing and, you know, throwing up questions for the museum sector. What does it mean to you?
Well, to me, it's all about encouraging socially engaged practice, but on a level in which it embeds in an organization. Because often the challenges that can be faced with change making is it's not supposed to be a fixed term project. You do this and there you go. We've made diversity happen. It's all about how you encourage an organization to put good values, a good ethos at the heart of its organization. Interestingly, I remember Sarah helped me with my branding about when I did some freelancing, and my subtitle was Valuing Change at the Heart of Museums. And every time I do a project or I do work to talk to museums, I always keep that in mind, because therefore whatever they're asking me to do, it's not I'm not coming on the outside to just create a component part for them. I'm coming in to help them incorporate that into across their profession.
Brilliant. And that's so beautifully put, Mark. So tell us a little bit about the report that's come out of Leicester, and I think Rebecca's going to put a link to it, Becoming a Change Maker in Museums, Experiences, Opportunities and Challenges.
Yes, wonderful.
Thank you about that and who the authors were.
Yeah, so this was a report that was commissioned by the Museums Association, I believe, for the University of Leicester to report on the findings of Transformers. Although it's about change makers specifically, Transformers were just the natural case study in that report, and it's by two lovely ladies, Mercy McCann and Nuala Morse, who aren't here today, but I'm speaking on their sort of progression. And it's based, so it was very interesting what came up, and I do recommend people read this afterwards. I think it's worth outlining some of the key challenges and blocks that came up as a result of change making, which was a lot about middle management. What we often found is directors at the top of a museum's organization are all about change, and they're encouraged and they're like, good luck with that. But it's the middle, we coined it the sticky middle, which causes all these problems because for whatever reason they might be resistant to change through having to manage it on the ground floor. Other issues that came up was the attitude towards change making, in that people thought is that organizations saw Transformers or the change makers that had these skills, and whatever they were doing were just vanity projects and not work in order to incorporate into their organization. And it was their responsibility. Change making isn't the change maker's responsibility. Change making is the collective responsibility. Change makers are just the champions.
Yeah.
So that's just a brief.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. I really do recommend you read the report. So Mark, we've had conversations, haven't we, about the impact of COVID-19 on change making per se, but maybe the individuals and projects and communities that are about the business of change making. What's happened? What is the impact on change making, do you feel?
Yeah, definitely. I should just say, hopefully, well, I know we'll see some good examples of change making from Rana next. She's done some brilliant work. But this is where I think it becomes really relevant to this conference, because it's already been noted that disabled people have been disproportionately affected by COVID, and ahead of museums reopening, and thinking about it in terms of a COVID building back better, change making, and what I've suggested, this is a time to really start new examples like digital. We haven't been able, I mean, it's only now that we're starting to see the benefits digital is starting to bring, but these very benefits we're talking about, it's been very quiet from disabled people for so long. Whether they're physically disabled, they've needed this digital access but haven't had that chance. And if you're neurodiverse like me with anxieties, that's another example. But now that we're all in the same boat, it's almost like we've come to realize that.
Absolutely. So couldn't we be doing some more change making together? Yeah. So that sense of collective change. Yeah. So for all our delegates here, what are the things that you'd like to leave with them? What would you like people to think about in terms of change making from your perspective?
Right. So this is based on what has been found. So my personal experience, but also others' experiences has been collated. That I now want to make the case that change making should be part of a business plan, part of forward thinking. It's interesting, and I'm going to sound like a nerd here, but for a job interview, I read into the accreditation. And has anyone else noticed how that it's essential to have an access statement, but if you want to put it access into your business plan or policy, then that's optional. I seem to remember that, and I think that surely that's the way to go in order to incorporate these ideas of diversity and inclusion. Making the business and policy and forward thinking argument is the way, so it's sustainable and it's not just one person doing the job, because it's already in the eyes of management and the stakeholders. And yeah, I think there's a lot more that needs to be done to get more of the decision makers involved. It's all well and good that we've got some of the top people that can see it from the higher point of view, but if they're just the directors who don't deal with the operating of the museum, that's not going to help as much as the management maybe below them or two below them that can put it into action. And there was also a lot about risk management in the report. So to put it in another, I'll be very quick, to beg for forgiveness as opposed to ask for permission. And what I mean by this is that change makers were hesitant to make those changes that a museum might needed because their management was sort of like, oh, I don't know if this is good or not. And now I'm not encouraging you go against your managers, but sometimes having the confidence to do something and leaving your hesitation behind and then getting the ball rolling can be very beneficial.
Yeah, lots of people are agreeing with you. So just get on with do it. Make it a collective, collaborative thing that we move forward with. And the time is right now. So kind of what I was saying this morning, we're all in this position of having to rethink and reshape what we're doing for ourselves and others. Yeah. One last point, Mark, before we then move over to Rana. This has been really great. Anything that you want to leave us with?
You're asking, that was a question.
It was, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's about sustaining and making it sustainable. So we've mentioned that people have really liked what you said about putting it within policy and planning.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, I think let's foster it. Let's I mean, it's a cliche, but let's get on and do it. What else is worth saying is that the change makers really thrive in a network of solidarity and support for one another. So instead of, you're not alone, so embrace it, get everyone on board, foster little groups, nothing wrong with a coffee down Sainsbury's Cafe every Saturday to discuss your ideas.
Absolutely. So keep those
Teamwork.
Conversations going. Yeah. Keep those collaborative working and keep this alive and making it everyone's business. So, be an accomplice, particularly to disabled change makers, because now is the time to, that will really benefit making inclusive cultures in the work.
And I should just say, I meant that in the context of accessible museums and doing all of that, but I forgot to. That was the intention, but you always miss things at the end, don't you?
You've done great. Thank you, Mark. And there are a lot of people who want to work collaboratively with change making. You could just feel it in the room. Thank you so much. I'm going to move over to Rana. Yeah, always lovely to have a conversation with you, Rana. So welcome, Rana. And Rana, would you like to describe yourself in the space and what's behind you? This is Rana Ibrahim.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Sarah and everyone. I'm echoing Mark as well with all his brilliant talk. I'm Rana Ibrahim. I'm from Iraq originally. I'm a woman of age, middle age of 40s, and I wear hijab as a Muslim and glasses. And my background is my logo for Iraqi Women Art and War المرأة العراقية الفن والحرب. مرحبا everyone. So this is in Arabic. Assalamu alaikum in Islam greeting.
Welcome. Now you're a Muslim artist. You're the founder of Iraqi Women Art and War and an archaeologist professional in the museum sector as well. We are going to show some slides and a short film that we will describe as we go through our conversation together. So Rebecca, can I ask you to bring up the slides, please? Now this beautiful image of you was one I picked up in some promotional thing that came through from the Museums Association. So we're looking for the slides.
Apologies, it's just not working. I'll try again. Saying it's your screen sharing is paused. Why is it paused? Apologies.
How about you give it to me, because I've got the presentation here. Would that
have
work?
you got? Yes, you can do it. You should be able to share. Can you share?
I'm just going to try now.
Apologies.
There I am. Is that? Can everybody see this?
I can see it. Can everyone else? Yeah.
Because I can't see people in the room. Wonderful. Yes. Thank you, Mark, for that. So Rana, what's going on here? Your beautiful blue hijab and you're laughing and conversing with someone. There looks like some tea in a glass there and something to eat. What is this? What is this event?
Yeah, this is amazing. It's remind me of the Museum Association program, Transformers program. At the end when we did the showcase, it's called Iraqi Chai. And it was part of the conference in Manchester, and I think in 2017, when it's the seed of my project, Iraqi Women Art and War, when I'm sitting with one of the delegates and talking about the project and having the tea, Iraqi chai and the biscuit and talk about the project. So it's introduction.
Yeah, so this was a wonderful starting point. And this went from strength to strength. I'm going to go here. So here we see you, Rana, with a group of are they Iraqi women, women wearing hijab as well. Is this in the History of Science Museum? Can you tell us a little bit about what you see? There are also films. Can you describe what these films are about too in the images?
So this is a project I've joined in 2018 called Multaqa, and Multaqa is a word in Arabic which means a meeting point. The project is a joint project between Pitt River Museums and the History of Science Museum. And here is myself training volunteers from different background, more from refugee background, forced immigrant and other background, training them as a museum project collection officer in a History of Science Museum, funded for 3 years, around 3 years. And I'm trying to explain the objects. We started with the Islamic collection, scientific objects, and with them, and we're training them to be a guided tour in Arabic and English. And the films below is that's at the end of the project last year, and through the lockdown, as my project IWAW supported a new exhibition, temporary exhibition, a metalwork exhibition, Islamic metalwork exhibition through my project. And these are the films, metalwork films from Iraq when I left, when I visited Iraq in 2018. So please go and visit my website and my YouTube channel, which is IWAW, Iraqi Women, Art and War, and all the films there, or the website, Multaqa website, the History of Science site is there. Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful, Rana. So you were developing, and I was quite closely involved with the development of Iraqi Women, Art and War, and it was creating an archive of objects, of ordinary things, working with women who are forced immigrants or refugees in the Oxfordshire area. And we're going to show you a short film, because even you, change making the way you did, we had to completely diversify what we were doing in not being able to stage this new archive collection, but making accessible film resources with audio descriptions and captions, and really bringing that alive. So the film here that I'm just about to play will shows the group, Iraqi women group, laughing together and singing, and Rana in the studio working with another artist to pull the exhibition together. And also we will hear the voices and see women from the project sharing with us how important it was for them. So.
My name is Rana Ibrahim. I'm the founder for Iraqi Women Art and War Group, a project set up to bring Iraqi women voices via art. The idea of the group was to meet regularly once a month to do workshops. Through this art workshop, we get to know each other better, sharing stories. It's just listening to them.
And I'm not going to make it because I don't know. I'm not going to drink it because I don't know.
I'd go home and we'd do some with the children, and I'd tell them all the stories that they told me. And my little girl would draw pictures of superhero women, and I'd be like, yeah, that's it. That's who they are.
Okay, so that's www.iwaw19.com, and that's where you can find out more about the project. Here, this next slide. So having developed these resources, and like Mark, you're really, really good at pushing everything out that you do on social media. Tell us a little bit about this slide. It's you with Diana Foster. It was something to do at the Northwall Arts Centre. Over to you, Rana.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so it was really successful of an exhibition called Of Ordinary Things when we did together, and it's established online now. It's available online in my website, also in Ashmolean Museum website as a part of a festival, One World Festival, will be available on physically in the Museum of Oxford in 2020 March. And this is and also they talked about it with me in a podcast. It's available on my Twitter, and this is attract people to interview me more about me as an artist. And this is actually also through the lockdown. So we did a million things through the lockdown. So this is actually a conversation between me and Diana Foster and Northwall, part of the international festival, Women Festival. And it's really good experience to talk to another brilliant artist. She used her art to talk about war. And I do recommend as well to see the full interview. It's on my website or their website as well. And I've also did an interview with a junior doctor. She went to Samos refugee camp and is a part of the Human Rights Festival in Oxford with the Oxford Brookes University. And we talked about how is art and how is her work as a junior doctor there. And I did a piece of art for inspired by her story, which is a really painful story, but I did this art and it's also available on my website.
Thank you, Rana. Thank you. If we can move on now. So what's been really important during lockdown particularly is you could continue developing your artistic practice for yourself. So here we see some of your artwork, which you do collage and montage. There's your eyes there, and There's a cutout of Munch, the scream, and a parrot. Can you say a bit more about how art has been important through this period of change making?
Yeah, so this is actually a Zoom piece, a Zoom to the a part of my art, which is it's a A1 art, it's collage artwork, and it's called Rana's Brain. So I put all my brain outside for you to explore, and it's part of me doing a course with Outside In charity for, it's called the Step Up course for artists during the lockdown, last lockdown, and I established a good network with brilliant artists, and the Flow Collective here is another logo, which is another step up for me, working with another 5 artists to establish our identity as a woman, and this piece of art is empowering my identity as an artist, women artist.
Fantastic. Yeah. And just going to move on to our last slide. It's there, you in a red hijab. You're holding a photograph of someone. Can you tell me the inspiration for your next change-making development?
Thank you, Sarah. Yes, this is my father. He passed away in 2009 due to terrorist attack in Iraq, unfortunately, and he was very interested in medicine, herbal medicine in Iraq, and he started his practice. But unfortunately, he passed away, and he left his the only book he's written, not finished yet, but he written 3 books about herbals, medicines in Iraq. And luckily, I managed to make a connection through my work with the university, Oxford University Botanic Garden, with Dr. Chris Thorogood and Dr. Shahina Gansford, which is she's in a Kew garden, and they supported me to do the project called Iraqi Flora, to translate and publish his work in English and Arabic, and we will take this forward to inspire other people in here and in Iraq as well. So it's networking.
Thank you, Rana. That's just so exciting to see how that project develops. There is one thing before we have to bring this to a close on change making. I know that you put in all the labor, that you work so hard to do this, but in terms of fixed term projects, what impact does this have on you as a museum professional? What are the blocks that you are currently facing?
Yes, this is really important question, because I've been in the museum sector now over 10 years here in the UK and 10 years in Iraq. And I, every time I start, establishing my career and putting my thought and skills across to my colleagues in the different museums, from Chester to Newcastle to Oxford to Liverpool, then Oxford. It's like it's always there is a barrier, either the grant barrier or a temporary position, or not really enabling to carry on with the making change because of a limit of the time, changing staff, different mindset in different museums, and then I have to start again. From the scratch every time. I go a little bit stepping up and then back down. So it's like, it's unfortunate. I'm afraid I always have this struggle to put my voice across. That's why I established my group, because it's not only my voice, it's I'm collecting a community voice, and I'm the leader of this. So I'm trying to enforce this in my way. With my space and what I believe is true, and to encourage the museum sector to take this abroad. It's very challenging until now, because have, like, I would challenge everyone here, can you put it on the chat? If you've been like, you grade 5 or 6, and then you go back to grade 1 or volunteer, which is nothing wrong with it, because
No.
I'm doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. But that sense of what could shift and change with some of the suggestions that Mark had around shifting this whole idea of change making for it to become policy. If we're really, really serious about inclusion and access, and Rani, you're also a disabled person as well, but I think you feel that really it's more to do with your cultural identity. Somehow there's something that doesn't allow you to push forward and maintain your grade. If we could think about it in a policy frame that everyone was invested in change making, rather than it being from the outside coming in for a little bit, all done that. You know, what are we doing to create legacy around these inspirational, life-changing perspectives that we need to uphold? Absolutely. Mark and Rana, I'm going to have to stop it there because I'm conscious of time. We've gone just over, but thank you so much for this time, for you sharing your experiences, your lived experience. You are so valuable, to this. So keep with it, and hopefully there are a lot of people who want to collaborate with you. Thank you so much. So we're going to move on. It's not the break yet, but you will have a tea break, I promise you. We're going to hear from Sam Bowen now, and she's the Museum Development Officer for the Southeast, and she's a parent of a SEND parent, so a parent of a young person with a disability. She is unable to be with us today, so she has sent us a video, and we've got a great little provocation for you afterwards, some questions she wants to ask you that we will pop you into breakout spaces once you've seen her presentation. Over to you, Rebecca, to share the video.
I'm going to try sharing again. If it doesn't work, I have a backup, but just bear with me because I'm not quite sure why it wouldn't let me do it last time. Oh, that looks like it's, is it working? Can people see? Brilliant.
It's not quite working. Yes.
Okay, that's why.
Hi, my name's Sam Bowen. For the benefit of those of you who can't see me today, I'm a white middle-aged lady with long brown hair which is tied back. I have green eyes and I may be wearing some blue glasses intermittently when I need to, but not at the moment. I've also got a blue V-neck top on. I'm afraid I can't actually be here with you in person today because by the time you actually are watching this, I'll be laid up in bed with my snoring cat, who I apologise may actually snore during this recording today, and a cup of tea and some magazines, having recently departed from my gallbladder. Happily departed, I have to say. But for now, you can connect with me after the event if you'd like to ask questions. My email address is samantha.bowen@hotmail.co.uk, or also on Twitter if you follow me at Make, Do and Send, and that's capital SEND. I'm a SEND and museum specialist, and SEND stands for Special Educational Needs and Disability. Before I start today, I believe I've still got you after the lunch slot, which is usually the difficult slot to fill. So I would like to bring you back into your room, bring you back into this space. I hope you had a nice lunch. I almost definitely won't have had lunch by now. But I hope it wasn't just grabbing a packet of crisps and a coffee and checking your emails. But to just get us back centered into the room, I would like to do an activity with you. Before we start, just please check that you don't have any hot drinks anywhere near you on the desk that you're sitting, and you don't have any cats who are just about to jump up onto your lap, which does happen in Zoom meetings, doesn't it? For those of you who need to still be looking at the screen to read the text coming up, the captioning, feel free to keep your eyes open. For the rest of you, I'd appreciate it if you gently close your eyes. Take a moment to listen to the noises that you can hear around you, outside of your room, outside of the building that you're in at the moment. Perhaps you can hear birds, or cars, or people chatting outside. Now return your focus back into your room, where you are sat. Listen to the noises around you. Listen to your breathing. Now, if you'd like, touch a piece of your clothing with your hands, perhaps a sleeve cuff or the edge of the top that you're wearing. What does it feel like? Feel the texture of the fabric. Is it rough or smooth, shiny, Perhaps it's stretchy. If you have any buttons or trimmings on your top, then run them under your fingernail to explore the shape of them. What do they feel like? How do your clothes feel on your body? Are they warm, heavy, or cool and light? Can you notice them actually touching your body? Now take both hands and place your palms up to your face. Take 2 deep breaths, in and out, and in and out. Now breathe normally. What do you smell? Is it the clean, sharp scent of soap from recently having washed your hands? Or perhaps the lingering aroma of the food that you ate at lunchtime? Or simply the smell of your own skin? Now return your hands to your lap and gently open your eyes again. We have just reconnected with ourselves in our own space, but at the same time. You have all just had a shared experience, yet one that was uniquely different to you because of who you are and where you are and what you bring to the space. Please, I'd like you to hold on to that thought as I talk you through the next 20 minutes or so, and this really short experience as we connect with the message that I hope to leave you with today. I usually start my training, my talks, with a little bit of an introduction about myself and a mild trigger warning here that if you have lived experience with SEND yourself or you're close to a SEND child, some of this may be upsetting to hear. I've been a museum professional for over 20 years. I started out as a curator, had a lovely time being a curator, and then I became an education manager at Leeds Castle, which is a huge education site, heritage site, and I set up the education department there. We had thousands and thousands of school visits and children from families as well. Unfortunately, in both of those jobs at the time, there was little guidance on SEND. In fact, I don't think it's a term that we used at the time. It was more access. And so it was limited to things like ramps, feely bags, and large print text. I also was a museum development officer earlier, and I've returned to that job now as a museum development officer. And even with the generic learning outcomes when they came out, nobody was really talking about SEND accessibility in the way we do now. That changed in my experience of SEND when I had my daughter. And within moments of her being born, she was diagnosed as having disabilities. She actually has a unique condition, severe learning disabilities. And as this picture here on the left shows her, she's in a wheelchair, actively drumming a drum there. My experience was bittersweet to start with, I should say. After her birth, I was returned to the 4-bed bay ward, where the 3 other mums were nursing their new babies, while mine was taken to special care baby unit. The curtains were drawn around my bed, only my bed. I don't know whether or not that was that for me to not to see them or for them not to see me. But within minutes, a paediatrician stuck her head through the curtains and told me that she thought there was something genetically wrong with my baby. Now, I was still quite high as a kite, actually, on morphine, having just had a cesarean section. So, but also I was limited to my understanding of what genetic conditions meant. So I said, do you mean you think my child's got Down syndrome? And she said, yes, I think your child has got Downs. She withdrew her head from the curtain, closed the curtains, and left me there on my own for 2 hours, whilst I was on my own without a baby, and the other ladies around me had their squalling infants with them. It's an experience I hope no other parent has to go through, but it was an important one for me, because that was my first moment of othering. Not just for me as a parent, clearly, but for my daughter as other and different. Less, maybe, I don't know. Sadly, that wasn't the last time that she has been misdiagnosed by a doctor as having Down syndrome, just on visual appearance a lot, and actually also happens, probably more forgivably, by complete strangers who will run up to us in the street, gleefully telling us that they have somebody in their family with Down syndrome. Now, I have absolutely nothing against any other condition, let me put that very clear, but the point is that labelling is very dangerous because it refuses to see the person as they are at first. My daughter is Lucy. She's not her condition, and I think you will find that most people with Down syndrome would say they are who they are first, not their condition. And there are lots of different conditions, and also the people with one condition are very different from other people with the same condition. So that's one important message that I have there. The other is that our experiences then of visiting museums and galleries, and my husband is a museum professional too, so we wanted to go out and experience museums and galleries and all that wonderful enrichment and experience with our daughter. And yet time and again we kept having difficult experiences where either the physical access was just so poor we couldn't get her in and out of places, or the learning and engagement was just so, well, negligent really in terms of looking at our needs as well as a family, and dismissive. We had some really poor experiences, which has now actually shaped my work. So I guess what I'm saying is from bad experiences, growth comes, right? And I now was returned back to being a museum development officer and was very, very lucky to be able to be given the chance to run several projects throughout the whole of the Southeast, working with museums of different sizes, with lots of different types of SEND groups, from age groups to needs. And I've delivered different resources. So if you go on the Southeast Museum Development website, you'll see all the case studies for the projects that I've run with museums and SEND groups, and also the Special Schools and Museums toolkit, which I wrote in 2018 as a guidance. So I'm just going to read some statements here that I believe. I believe that museums are transformative spaces that can inspire moments of wonder, magical discovery, and meaningful engagement with all visitors. Children with special educational needs and disabilities, SEND, have the right to those same experiences, and their inclusion is valuable, not just for their own development and well-being, but for that of their families, friends, and museum staff. Making museums SEND accessible makes it accessible for everyone, relevant to everyone, and enriches the experience for everyone. Museums are well placed to offer welcoming and accessible experiences within their communities to help shape a more inclusive society. This is a goal all museums should strive for. There's a picture here on the left with my mum, my wonderful mum, and my lovely daughter Lucy, really engaging in one of those meaningful moments. This is at Pal Cotton Museum in Birchington in Kent, and it is one of our favourite places to go to. I have said this before to other people. And basically it's because this discovery room here, Gallery 5, has handling objects that are authentic. So these are African drums, which you can just experience in your own way. It sounds so simple, but it really is meaningful. Being SEND friendly means that families can feel confident in the museum space together, relax and have those wonderful experiences, and they feel welcome. And inclusion means everyone can access the museum in their own way and have experiences and great memories. And that's really what we're about, isn't it? This in turn promotes self-confidence and positive well-being, not just for visitors, but for museum staff too. And all the museums I've worked with on special projects, all of the museum staff have said how the project had impacted on them deeply, meaningfully, in a long-lasting way, and how they'd seen the collections in a different way, even seen themselves in a different way sometimes as well. They were moved by working with SEND children and young people. Inclusion within your museum also tackles social isolation and loneliness. And that's a particularly difficult thing for SEND families, a particularly common thing for SEND families. And it's been made worse since COVID. You may not know this, but the law changed within 2 weeks of the first lockdown in the COVID pandemic, changing the laws for the rights for children like my daughter to have their usual access to respite, education, even therapy. And a year having not had therapy, we're still playing catch up. And to be honest, we're never going to catch up because they're not putting in new posts to be able to catch up with the speed of the deficit for that last year. So people talk about, there's a lot of talk, isn't there, about learning deficit for the children, the lost year of people not having had access to, say, proper school, having been homeschooled for that period of time when there was so much people didn't know what they were doing. But for our children, for SEND children, that's even worse. I do believe that museums can make a real difference in social inclusion. We do it with other groups. It's absolutely the same with SEND. And we should be setting best practice locally within communities by our practice. Welcoming everyone puts a lens on equality, making disability visible in museums. I think that's really important. So it's actually not just making a good space where everyone can feel that they can come and enjoy their time together, but they can actually enjoy it at the same time as other people from their community who they may not know. I'm just going to give you some statistics now. which you may already know, but 8% of children in the UK are disabled. That's not a small number on its own. But as I always say, if you can think about adding their siblings and friends in with that and their peers who would normally, say, come on a museum visit with the families, we could be talking to up to 20% or a fifth of the child population being affected by access needs. And what I mean by that is you wouldn't expect a family with 1 or 2 disabled children and then non-disabled children in the same family to split that group up so that the non-disabled children can come to your museum on your lovely activity session, and the disabled kids, I don't know, where do they stay at home, or do they go off with a carer somewhere else for the day? I don't think anybody would think that's acceptable. Over 10% of homes have a disabled child in the family as well. And so here's some statistics and quotes, which I think will surprise people if they've not seen them before. The Disabled Children's Partnership in 2020 did a study which said that 43% of people say that they don't know anyone with a disability, despite 1 in 5 people in the UK being disabled. And 97% of parents, I mean, that's nearly all of us, isn't it, with a disabled child, say that the public do not understand the challenges they face every day. I absolutely would concur with that. The Ecclesiastical did a study which was reported in The Guardian in 2019, and at the time it was a massive furore, but I don't think much has happened since. But 42% of parents surveyed, parents of special needs children, reported that not only visitors but staff were unfriendly or made them feel uncomfortable when they visited museums or heritage sites. 87% of parents have felt judged by members of the public, and 41% of us have been offered no emotional support. I think it's probably higher than that, actually. And that's from Scope, Now Is the Time report. So I want to have a discussion about why this possibly is. We talk about access and we tend to think about physical access, don't we? The ramps and things at the right height, or even perhaps large print text. And that is absolutely, a massive part of it. But I'm wondering whether or not we think that because we don't see that many SEND families in museums, that we don't think that museums are for them, to which I'd answer, build it and they will come. I believe that in museums we privilege cognition, and by that I mean the acquisition of new knowledge. We privilege that, and we privilege the ability to see vision over other forms of engagement. And you can see this in the GLOs, so the generic learning outcomes, which I know are quite old now, but people definitely still use them. They hint at other forms of learning, such as feelings and perceptions and being inspired, but overwhelmingly the language uses for directing our work within museums focuses on facts or information gaining and gaining intellectual or physical skills. It actually says intellectual or physical skills. And that is limiting and arguably you could say even ableist language to be doing that. Why do we do it? Do we ever question that we do it? There are other forms of engagement and reasons for visiting a museum, like well-being, social interaction with family and friends and others, and a day out in a safe and interesting place, and fun. I'd argue as well for some people, and it's not just SEND families actually, for some people, just going to a different space which has that to soak up the atmosphere. We say that in our terminology, the awe and wonder of museums, soaking up the atmosphere, passing through galleries, not standing and having to look at text, but just soaking it up is enough. And for some families, so SEND families, that will be a massive achievement. Getting out of the house into an unknown space, staying in the unknown space for a period of time with different people that you don't know, would be seen as an achievement. And from there you build. From there you build that relationship. And so you offer them more, and I build it, and they will come, and they will keep coming, and they will return, and they will become a valuable part of your community. Why do we not value these types of engagement as highly as what we call learning? What are we afraid of doing wrong by welcoming SEND? And even more contentiously, I'll ask, who are we afraid of upsetting if we do welcome SEND? Remember the ecclesiastical comment. It wasn't just staff that had made them feel unwelcome at those visits, it was other visitors. Is it difficult? Are these difficult conversations we feel that we're trying to avoid because we might need to manage other visitors' expectations or concerns or comments if a child is making noise or behaving in a certain way because they are learning and engaging in their way, which is different to yours? Here's 2 images. On the right is my daughter Lucy looking at it's actually a painted portrait, looks like a photograph, doesn't it? But it's a painted portrait of a chocolate Labrador, and it is in the Turner Contemporary Gallery. On the left is actually a stock image, Microsoft stock image, but of a gentleman looking at a similar picture, dog portraits, although there was a human hand involved in the portraits. I think they're photographs in a similar gallery setting, very good style. So very similar art, very similar context. Two people looking at their art. My question is it a similar image, similar engagement? It's probably an easier question to ask in a gallery setting than a museum setting. But are they valuing it in the same way? I don't know. My daughter's nonverbal. I don't actually 100% know why she was really drawn to that picture of all of the paintings that we saw that day. And they weren't all animals, I don't think, from memory. The only thing I could possibly perceive it as is her granddad was blind. He sadly passed last year. He was blind and he had a lovely series of guide dogs over the years. And she particularly liked Sparky, who was the last guide dog, who wasn't a chocolate lab, actually. He was, they were the yellow labs, I think they're called, aren't they? But they did have a really special bond. So I did wonder whether or not Lucy was looking at that picture and remembering Sparky. It's possible, but there was no way of knowing at the time. The point is she definitely engaged with it and she definitely enjoyed the exhibition just as much as this man on the left is in his exhibition. So who do we think museums are for? When we think about who museums currently attract, do we know why they visit? Do we ask why they visit? I did a survey with kids in museums last year in September with SEND families, and so we asked them why do they visit. Only 27% of them said that they visit for education reasons or to support school learning. 43% said they just visited for fun, and that's fine, isn't it? 77% of them said that they visited for family time, and of that, 16% was extended family, so not the people that lived with them in that household, but cousins, grandparents, maybe aunties, uncles. And importantly as well, we also asked them what they wanted from visits when they go back to museums post-pandemic, and 40% of them said that they wanted more SEND-aware staff and a better visitor welcome. Do we ever ask our visitors how they engaged or what other benefits they had other than learning in the traditional sense from their visit? Do we ever judge our usual visitors, should I say, for this, or value them any less if they just stood there absorbing the painting, for instance, or absorbing the object, or they just come in and have a cafe coffee natter with their friend because they want to catch up, or if they come in because they're looking for a birthday gift and they come into your shop and they don't even go anywhere near your exhibitions in the first place. Where is the most value in museum engagement? What do we mean by well-being impact, social change and community partnership? Where does SEND fit into this? These are questions I'm deliberately asking to probe you into thinking about stuff that you already do, probably. You already will be looking at the well-being impact of your museum. It's not just a hot topic. Speaking in museum development terms, it's also thinking about relevance in museums, and going forward, we need to, for a future of museums, definitely embed our value within our communities, and well-being does that well. But have we ever really thought about who else that reaches out to? Well-being is a universal human thing, isn't it? So I believe it's time to flip the narrative. I don't own this term, Ellie Chappell, and I would definitely tell you to go and follow her on Twitter at Ellie_Chappell, owns this. She's inspirational in the work that she does. And she says, we are all different, but we're also the same. We're human. Ellie has a daughter with profound learning disabilities and physical disabilities, and she talks around the world on why we need to all engage together and flip the narrative on who we value and what does value mean. So as museums, we serve the people, all people, and it's our job not to leave anyone out. We may need to welcome, deliver and equip slightly differently to adapt to their needs, but valuing everyone's experience of our spaces and collections is part of the magic wrapped up in them. And I promise you, if you commit to this, it will enrich your own experience of your museum and that of your staff too. So in a minute, you're going to be doing the breakout activity. I'm sorry I can't join you with this today because I'd love to hear your feedback, but I'm sure I'll be sent it. And like I say, you can connect with me. If you've got any questions that come out of this, would like some pointers or suggestions, then please do so. I'm also, should have said at the top, I've had funding from Arts Council through a lottery grant. I'm very grateful for that, for a 2-year project. And I will be developing a Send in Museums website, which will be ready later on this summer. And I will inform you through Museums Association on Twitter when it's ready to see. That will have a 3-pronged approach. So it's a website to motivate people and advocate for it, saying why you should be doing this. Sections on how, and there's a huge range of things that we can be doing to become more Send friendly, and I'll tell you how to do that. And also I'll introduce you into who to work with that can take that forward with you. I will also be developing an advocacy film with a filmmaker, and I'll be writing with other collaborations. We'll be writing generic Send family guides that museums can download for free to help families use their museums when they visit. So now I will hand you over to the person that's running the breakout activity, and you'll be asking 2 questions of your group and feeding back. The first question will be, why do we value some visitors over others? And the second question is, what are we going to do about it? How are we going to change? I look forward to connecting with you at some point in the future. Bye-bye and take care.
So thank you to Sam, and we wish her well for speedy recovery. So over to you, Rebecca. We're going to pop people into the breakout rooms for 10 minutes.
Exactly, yes, and I'll attempt to broadcast those questions again to each breakout room if you need them again. Just a reminder, if anyone wants closed captioning, come back to this room and ideally turn your camera on so we know you're here, and we can have the conversation here with our closed captioners. I'll put them in the breakout rooms out. So I've got 2 computers going on, so excuse me, I'm just going to do it over here. Hang on, starting. Mistakes. Let me try again. Why is that not working? Just going to do a countdown.
It's working, I think.
I know, not everyone's gone in, and do you know why? It's because some people left and came back, so I have to start again. So I'm just going to try again. Oh, why is it not working? So sorry, everybody. I do hate seeing sometimes with breakout rooms. So it looks like I'm going to have to recreate them all again. Bear with me. Bear with Zoom. Recreate. And
Rebecca, I think you've got to select a breakout room for longer than 10 seconds.
Not the 10 seconds, Mark. It's every time I'm trying to close it, it's saying it's doing a countdown.
Oh dear.
Sorry. Just bear with me. So that's my 10-minute countdown. I can't quite. I might try doing it from this computer. Why not? See if this works.
Computer says.
Sorry, everybody. Wait a minute. So if I recreate.
I keep joining.
They want to go. Sorry, everyone that's left. Is that because you haven't gone in or because you've chosen not to? I'm going to remove my spotlight.
Okay, welcome everybody back from your break. Hope you're refreshed. We're into the last part of our afternoon. Thank you for everything that you've shared in the chat about all the changes that need to happen, your reflections on our last session in terms of who do we value more and what we need to shift and do differently in that respect. You are able to save the chat yourself, but we will be saving it too. There's such rich information and contacts and links there. So I'm delighted to welcome Esther Fox into the space to give the next presentation. She's head of the Accentuate programme, and she's going to be exploring the barriers that are put up for disabled people during the recruitment process. And she's at the helm of a really interesting project working with 20 museums called Curating for Change. So Esther, you're going to be driving your own PowerPoint, aren't you? So I'm going to hand over to you. Esther
Thank you,
Fox.
Sarah. Well, yes, I hope I'll be driving my PowerPoint, but we'll see if there are any technical hitches with that. But thanks very much. Just for the case of doing some audio description, I'm in my mid-40s. I'm white, female, with grey, blonde hair. I'm wearing a black polo neck jumper. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak today. It's a real privilege to be able to talk about the work we're doing and share with so many people that are interested in this theme. So I have prepared a presentation which I'm now going to attempt to share my screen to talk through with you. So here we go, with any luck. So if anybody can't see that, do let me know, and I'll do my best to sort out the any issues. So as Sarah said, my name's Esther Fox and I run a programme called Accentuate. And recently we've been developing a project called Curating for Change, which has been funded by National Lottery Heritage Fund. And we're currently in the development phase of that. So we've been doing a lot of consultation. So this is really what I wanted to talk to you about in terms of the work that we've been doing over the last year. So when we get into delivery phase, the aim of Curating for Change is that it will bring about a sea change in the way deaf, disabled and neurodivergent people are represented in our museums. So this will happen through a tailored work placement programme of fellowships and traineeships and through public exhibitions and events. And those events and exhibitions will be led by our fellows and trainees. So a new network of over 20 host museums will be established to share this learning, demonstrating exemplar ways of working across the sector. And we've already got that range of host museums lined up. So we're very privileged to be working with some fantastic museums, really diverse collections across England. So from people like the National Railway Museum, the Thackeray Museum of Medicine, Black Country Living Museum, Hastings Museum, Pitt Rivers and Ashmolean, a huge range of museums that I can't name all today, but just to give you a flavour of the sorts of museums we're working with. So the consultation process has enabled us to really hear from disabled people and museums, and we've done that by 5 online surveys for our partner museums in relation to workforce and audiences, partner museums in response to their digital offer, disabled people wanting to pursue a career in museums, disabled people already working with museums, and for disability or community groups who either already work with museums or would like to. And we also held 12 more detailed phone conversations with disability focus groups and 3 consultation workshops via Zoom with deaf and disabled and neurodivergent people who either already work with museums or were interested in pursuing a career within museums. So I just wanted to quickly show you some visual minutes. Really, one is an example of a way of capturing information in an accessible way for some people. If they find a lot of text difficult to process, do consider using visual minutes, because it's a great way of condensing a lot of information in quite a visual way. But obviously they're also not terribly accessible to visually impaired people. So I'm just going to pull out some of the things from this cartoon of some of the responses that we had in our consultation workshops. So there's a picture of a woman in the left-hand corner with a great big pile of boxes saying, I got told I should be relocated from my role that I trained a decade for because I couldn't lift materials. Somebody else sitting at a desk saying, I wasn't allowed to sit in front of house because it looked unprofessional. And then on the right-hand side, there's some examples of people saying that museums might be talking the talk, but what do you really want to employ disabled people, but your job form says otherwise? And there's a picture of a computer screen with apply and lots of different numbers on it. So these are just some of the key themes that were coming out of our consultation, which is why I wanted to talk to you today in the context of recruitment. So our consultation highlighted that currently there are very few people openly identifying as deaf and disabled or neurodivergent working at management or leadership level within museums. And people experienced that museums didn't have the confidence or skills to open up their institutions and support disabled people. So the reason I kind of thought that was quite important to highlight was because actually we really want to change the culture of museums so that they feel a welcoming place, so that people do feel that they can apply and that they will have a chance to progress their career within a museum. Because unless you really change that culture and enable people to realise that they will be valued, and actually museums do want to work with disabled people, they may not feel that actually they can even make that first step. So some of the responses we got were two responses here. No, I don't know of any deaf or disabled or neurodivergent managers or leaders in my organisation. And if there is, they don't speak openly about their condition, which isn't good for any organisation as it makes people think there isn't a place for them. I'm the only disabled person in my museum and I feel that. So that's what I mean about kind of changing that culture. So what are the other sort of main recruitment barriers that people highlighted to us? Disabled people are less likely to hold an academic qualification, which is often a requirement for entry-level roles that focus on collections research. And disabled people are also less likely to have extensive work experience, as they may not have had equal access to volunteering opportunities or may not have followed a traditional route into curatorial roles. So again, some quotes from some of our participants. I've been applying for jobs for nearly 8 months now. I just do not have the experience. I feel like even when it says it's entry level, it is not. I've done an internship, but it was only 6-7 months. That is not enough. I know I'm too experienced to go for any internships, but I'm not experienced enough for any jobs in the sector. And the second person said, even if you are looking for entry-level jobs, if you want to be a gallery assistant or something like that, pretty much all of those jobs that I've looked at in the description, it says you have to be able to stand for 8 hours straight. Even if you want to start at that level, it's very difficult for people with mobility or chronic illnesses to even get in at that level because your stamina is prized as one of your skills or abilities when going for those kinds of jobs. So we thought, okay, well, let's look at the kind of jobs that are out there at the moment and see if this chimes with what people have been saying around the barriers that they face. So we looked at 2 recent examples of collections assistant roles, which are the gateway roles to eventually becoming a curator in these organisations. And they were requiring previous experience as a trainee collections assistant or equivalent, good manual dexterity and eye-to-hand skills, and ability to work from ladders and tower scaffold, ability to lift objects and work at height and in confined spaces, icon conservation technician qualification or conservation and collections care technician's diploma or similar, driving license. So very clear things that there didn't appear to be any flexibility about, which absolutely chimed with the barriers that people have been telling us. So again, in response to this, 2 quotes. The first one, being someone who cannot drive because of my disability, sometimes that I would really like to see change is organising an understanding of access to work. Access to work can fund your mobility. Organisations do not really seem to understand that. One thing that really bothers me is because I enjoy a lot of co-production and community engagement, when you are specifically saying you need a driver, you're cutting out a large part of the disabled community sometimes. And the second person, assuming that this one individual has to be able to do everything, when actually, if you've got a PA, which is a personal assistant, support, or whatever, you've got that person, they can do some of the other physical things that you may not be able to do. So what we want to try and highlight is that there is support out there through the Access to Work scheme, and I'll mention that a bit later, that can actually address some of these barriers. So flexibility is also a key thing that's needed if being genuine about attracting diverse candidates. So again, from two people that we talked to, organisations which say in the job advert, we would really welcome people from disability backgrounds, people of colour, LGBTQ. They are underrepresented within our work and we want them to apply. I applied for, and that was when I was very ill. I emailed them and said, you said you wanted disabled people on this scheme. This is my disability. I would need these hours of flexibility to do it. The reply I got was, no, you can't do that. It's a full-time position. And then somebody else said it annoyed me quite a lot. Now all the job interviews have been done over the phone with COVID on Zoom or Skype. Before that, that was an ableism, as some people call it. In the interviews over the phone were just not good enough. Just 1 month or two later, after that happened, everything was done on the phone. So that was another thing that we clearly heard through our consultation, that there's been a big shift since COVID-19 in terms of proving that flexible working can work and that there should be this flexibility built into job applications and interview processes and long-term working, and we shouldn't slip back into the unflexible ways that have been in the past. So I've sort of said about the barriers, and now I'd like to talk about some positive examples. So one person said, I've just got some positive things to say about the organisation that I work for. Things like having a service user on the panel of the interviews. I've been on one of the panels, having that input from somebody that is a disabled person and can see maybe challenges or barriers, things that can get in the way, how to overcome those. So really valuing the lived experience of somebody and what they could bring to the recruitment process from the other side, so from the interviewing side. So obviously through Curating for Change, we'll be doing our own recruitment process to try and attract our fellows and trainees. So the things that we're looking for the fellows, which we're hoping will kind of be entry-level curatorial. And the reason that we've really chosen curatorial roles is because the curator has such a powerful way to tell stories, and disabled people aren't just underrepresented in terms of the workforce, but they're also underrepresented in terms of our collections and exhibitions and displays and how we really talk about disability history. So we're really hoping that can be done with a new lens. So we're looking for somebody that has interesting ideas about what museums could be and the role that they can play within communities. They maybe have done some previous research or written about museum collections, but that might be, through their own blogs or something in a magazine. Doesn't have to be in a museum setting. Or they may have created a digital output or delivered their own small-scale exhibition. We're interested in people that can communicate and tell stories in a variety of ways, and that they have a basic understanding of what a curator does. But we're not asking for people to have specific qualifications or a particular expertise. So what we also would encourage people to think about when recruiting is outline the support that you can offer them too. So we're going to be able to offer personal access and travel budgets, but you could potentially offer that in your museum by using Access to Work to meet any of those needs. So you could say you would work with candidates to put in an Access to Work application. Also think about flexible working options. As I said previously, we're really keen to show that there's been a big shift since COVID-19. So say that you're open to working flexibly. And again, think about your working spaces, potentially that any barriers could be met through an Access to Work funding stream. We're going to be offering qualifications, but I appreciate that not everybody can do that. So we're going to be offering opportunities to do on-the-job experience to complete a cultural heritage diploma level 3 or start working towards the associateship of the Museums Association. But if you can't offer a kind of set qualification, you might be able to offer some professional development help. So how can you help people develop their professional networks and improve their applications and interview skills, and give them the confidence they need to take the next step in a museum career? And really important, I think, is to create this shift within museums, is ensuring that people's voices are heard and make sure that people understand that their views and experiences are valued and listened to through regular opportunities to feedback and opportunities to shape the way things are done. Because, you know, this is actually an opportunity for museums to really engage with disabled people and understand that disabled people have a lot to offer in terms of helping museums think differently about the way they approach things. So thinking about the recruitment process, again, we're trying to keep ours very open. You might ask somebody to create a film, or you might say that they can submit a written application, or maybe they could create a visual collage. It doesn't always have to be a very rigid application process. And the things that we'd like to hear about is a bit about their professional backgrounds, what roles they've done, whether that be freelance, traineeships or voluntary. How have they been previously involved in museums or not? Something about their favourite object or an item in the museum collection and why it's their favourite. So we really want to get people talking about their passion for museums and hearing about that, and why they believe it's important to have a better representation and engagement of deaf, disabled and neurodivergent people in museums. So obviously a key point for Curating for Change is to tackle that underrepresentation. So we want to hear why they want to be part of that journey. But for us and for you, we always encourage people to say, do talk to us about their application, or if they have any questions about the process. And then the selection interview process itself, be clear about how applications will be shortlisted and by whom. What will the interviews be like? Would they be face-to-face or can they be online, depending on any restrictions or access requirements? And will any travel expenses be covered? One thing that we heard in a lot of in our consultation, that people had not actually had very good experiences with the disability confidence scheme, because they felt that if they'd met the minimum criteria for a job and had ticked that they were a disabled person, they would probably get an interview, but the museum was actually never really serious about considering that person for the job because they didn't have the experience that they actually wanted them to have. So they may have paid hundreds of pounds out of their own savings to get to interviews that they never even had a chance of getting the job. So that was really a key barrier for people, was actually the expenses involved in going for interviews. And in advance of the interview, we will tell people their questions that we're going to ask and give them time to prepare. So again, that's something that you might be interested in considering doing. And who will be on the interview panel? Can you include an independent person with a lived experience of disability? So going back to that previous example of somebody that said they felt that was a positive example to have a disabled person on the panel. And if the interviews take place on site, would they also have an opportunity to tour the museum and ask any general questions? And we will provide feedback to all unsuccessful interviewees. So again, that might be something that you can do if you don't already, maybe many of you do, but just to give people a sense of how they could improve in the future. So I'm going to be around for the question and answers with Tamsin later, but just to kind of summarise the thinking behind this presentation, I just wanted to end with 3 questions really, and that is, if there was no set formula about what recruitment might look like, so, you know, if you didn't have to be, for example, a local authority museum that had to use a particular application portal, or a university museum that uses a particular application portal, what might recruitment look like? And how innovative can you be in thinking about different ways to attract more diverse applications? So, for example, our museum partners are going to create a short film where they introduce themselves and their museum, and they're basically pitching themselves to say, come and work with us. so that you're immediately beginning to break down that barrier of that kind of faceless institution. And what can you do to nurture and support people once they're in post to ensure that real inclusion and equity exists, and that you retain staff? Because even when people are getting their foot in the door, it's very difficult, we've heard, for them to then make that career progression. So that's why I was highlighting earlier ways that you could potentially support people to really grow their networks and skills and develop their professional profile. So I'd really love you to go and think about those three things, and hopefully that we can have a chat about it later. But I'm going to stop sharing my screen now.
Thank you so much, Esther. It was really great. Obviously difficult to hear some of those struggles and blocks that people have experienced, but that wealth of resourcing that you just said about what is possible, what you can provide and what you can put in place. So if I ask people here just one thing that they might do in and around recruitment moving forward. So to share that in the chat now, just in case we have a little bit of reduced time for that Q&A, so we can get a sense of what you feel that you would like to move forward, whether it's yourself or within your department, within your organization, some ideas that have really resonated with you. I love the film's ideas, you know, the responsibility on this is who we are. I love that, different formats. It feels really a positive thing. Thank you so much, Esther. I'm going to ask Tamsin to join us. Welcome. I'm going to hand over to Tamsin, who is Professional Development Officer at Museums Association. And she's going to focus particularly on the sticks and stones research to talk about how this can sort of give us some thinking around creating inclusive working environments. So over to you, Tamsin. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. And I also have some slides to share. But so Tamsin Russell, Museums Association. So I'm a 50-year-old cis white woman. I have a blunt dark fringe, glasses, and a red lipstick smile. So I'm going to share my slides, and my slides are white font on a dark blue background. I have a PDF version of these slides that anyone can get access to. I also have a transcript of the content that I'm going to talk through if people would like that also. And finally, if you want some template slides with any of the content in here that would enable you to support any lobbying or influencing, then please let me know. So, creative and inclusive culture. So we're going to be talking about a number of things. So I'm going to start by talking about the employee life cycle. And Esther's done a fantastic starting point because we're going to talk a little bit about recruitment and selection, but then move very quickly on to employee experience within an organisation. I'm going to talk about organisational culture, and I want to introduce you, I suppose, to one of the most commonplace ways of thinking about organisational culture to enable you to think about what that means for you and also for your next steps. I'm going to focus on the sticks and stones research around bullying museums, because what it highlights, and you will see, is the concept of bullying behaviours and what that means in terms of creating perhaps a more hostile environment, a more excluding environment. We're then going to do some breakouts for about 10, 13 minutes or so, where you'll have an opportunity to reflect on all the content that I'm going to be sharing and think about what that then means for your next steps. And then I'm looking forward to sharing the space with Sarah and Esther on the Q&A panel. So bear with me. My slide screen, for whatever reason, has gone to the wrong area, so bear with. Many apologies for this. Let me get back. So I think we've been doing lots of listening. So what I would like you to do, bear with me. There is an issue with my slide screen, so bear with me one moment. I'm just going to come out.
You want me to share? So it's Rebecca talking, Tamsin. Do you want me to try sharing them? Otherwise,
no. I mean, it's working previously. So just let me give me one more go, and I am hopeful. She says, hopeful. absolutely interesting.
Go to slideshow.
Yeah, no, it just looks like a completely and utterly different set of slides, but it's fine. I'm going to just start. Yeah, it's just there's something different, something missing. But anyway, I'm going to start, everybody. So I was going to get everybody to start thinking around answering particular questions around inclusive practice. So because we've been listening for quite a bit of time, I think it is quite helpful just to think about answering questions around what have you done in terms of your own inclusive practice and experience around that, and what would you like to see other organisations doing? What Esther has talked about is recruitment and selection. And so what we've got in front of us here is a pathway. So we've got 9 separate boxes that's got some highlighted text in it, essentially identifying and communicating the employee life cycle. So we've talked about recruitment, which is around attracting a field of candidates. We've talked about selection, which is then selecting between them. And that really is where a lot of the emphasis around this particular work has taken place. And this is important, completely important. We want diversity, we want to attract people, we want to appoint people. But what I wanted really just to highlight with some other particular aspects of the employee life cycle is that recruitment and selection is only one part of that. So after being selected, we might be offered the job. We might then go through an induction process. We might go through some performance and actually start doing the job. There may be an appraisal process. We might get some development as a function of that. And we might also get an opportunity to progress either vertically or horizontally. And at the end of the employee cycle, then there's a concept of departure, either from the institution or the sector. So understanding this pathway is important. And the example I want to give is I've worked at the Museums Association for 5 years. That equates to 8,050 hours. And the reason I think it's important to focus on those other elements of our experience of work is that we may well, and I'm hopeful that we will, continue to break down those barriers that are stopping people being appointed into our museums for whatever basis that barrier exists. But what we have to remember is that if we don't then change the rest of the culture of the organisation, so that my 8,050 hours working at the Museums Association is positive and inclusive, then what we'll see at the end of that is people leaving those institutions and leaving the sector. And there's a real risk with those individuals that work in organisations that aren't signed up to diversifying the workforce, that they then look at me as a statistic that says, well, that didn't work, did it? So we tried to recruit somebody that was diverse, they've come along, the sector's not for them, they've moved on, we're not going to do that again. So I want the emphasis of today really to focus on the experience of the employees. And one of the ways I want to think about that, and you may have come across this particular model of understanding culture, this is Edgar Schein, so a professor from MIT, and it's a fairly well accepted model of organisational culture. And it presents the idea that at the heart of an organisation, there are particular ideas or beliefs around how we operate and what we do. And these are hugely deeply embedded in what we do, and we don't necessarily talk about it. It's just who we are and how we progress. Then what institutions are very good at is espousing what they think is important. So they may then highlight very clearly their commitment to things. And I challenge you to look at the visions of different organisations and identify in their mission and vision statement what values they have. Will we see words like equity, inclusion, diversity, equality? So organisations can, through having their espoused values, and this is called an onion, so to visualise it, we have those underlying beliefs and values right at the heart, the hardest to get to. And then what we begin to do as an organisation is say what we're committed in doing. And then on the outside of this is that what we see, the artifacts and symbols, that's the language from Edgar Schein, but this is what we see. These are the policies, these are the procedures, this is the structure, it could be the logo. And what Edgar says is that the real challenge is to think about how we move a particular organisation from being one that's not inclusive, for example, to one that is inclusive. And that is about challenging the difference between what we believe and then what we actually do. And this is where often in organisations we see tokenistic action. So we may well see the disability confident commitment because it's visible. That's a symbol that we're committed, but actually the extent to which that still resonates with what we actually believe then really has an impact on then how it plays out. The other thing we need to think about is the difference between what we say, so these espoused values, to then what we actually do. And this is the extent to which you might say, well, we've been saying this for the last 20 years, it's in my organisational vision, yet we've not seen any change. Now, from a culture change perspective, and I love what Mark said around collective responsibility, I do also think we have power as our own individual change makers, is that it's easier sometimes to change the things at the surface of the organisation, because that enables us to begin to move people's day-to-day experience onwards, but it doesn't ever really address some of the deep-seated issues and biases and prejudices that may exist. And what Edgar Schein says is that to be able to have those conversations around those and to look at those changes, we need to talk about it. And a really basic rule of thumb that's not hugely inspiring is that for every 10 years an institution has been in existence, it will take roughly a year to change the culture. So we are in on a long game. So what you might be thinking is it's taken ages for us to get here, but we have been making progress. Organisations, by their very nature, to take often a long time to move forward. Not an excuse, but a reality that we can change. So this is a slide that I use when I am working and talking about bullying behaviours. It is a very clear symbol and sign that says that you are welcome. Your presence here is welcomed. Your presence here does not assume you've been a target of bullying. Your presence here does not assume you have been a perpetrator. Your presence here does not assume you've been a bystander. We care about your well-being. Please disclose only what you feel comfortable disclosing. Feel free to leave the session at any time. All contributions are in confidence. Feel free to share nothing, say nothing, and no disclosed content will be shared outside this session. This is an example of how an organisation can set the tone for productive conversations. Don't need to share this slide, but it's an important marker, it's an important symbol that when I'm talking about these things, I want to have an open conversation. So I want to introduce you to the backgrounds and aims of this particular research, and the research sticks and stones will be the backdrop to what we're talking about today. So no sector is immune from bullying, yet there's been very little research in the arts. The hashtags around Me Too in 2018 and more recently Black Lives Matter in 2020 really focused our attention even more on making this content available. What we know is that bullying creates and endorses and perpetuates exclusion, which is why we need to think about it from a cultural perspective. The aims of the research was to raise the profile of bullying and bullying behaviours, and I'll talk about what we mean about bullying behaviours in a moment, to signpost information and to provide advice, to undertake some preliminary research, and this is what you're going to hear about shortly, and then also to look at key findings and recommendations, and we'll share some of those shortly. Definitions are really important about when we're talking about bullying and people's experience of work, and we adopted two definitions to support our work in this. So we've got bullying is offensive, abusive, malicious, insulting and or intimidating behaviour that occurs on one or more occasions, and that's from Anne-Marie Quigg, who's written about bullying in the arts. And then we also accepted another more generalised definition by ACAS, which is bullying may be characterised as offensive, intimidating, malicious behaviour and abuse or misuse of power through the means of undermining, humiliating, denigrating or injuring the recipient. Definitions are important. Principles are also important. So as part of our research, we wanted people to realise that this is around sustained activity. There is a malevolent approach, there is the detrimental impact, and that's the conscious act. Now, this is really interesting when we look at the writings around micro-expressions and ableism in organisations, where often the concept of a microaggression is that there isn't a malicious intent. It's often not with a hostile intent. Yet what we know from the research around microaggressions is that there is still a significant psychological toll on the recipients of those comments and of those attributions. We talked very clearly about language that makes this serious. So we use language. A target is someone who's experienced bullying. A perpetrator is someone who has bullied a target. A bystander is somebody who's witnessed bullying behaviour. And bullying behaviour in its broadest sense is a negative behaviour. I'm going to talk about this from the lens of the research based on individuals that disclosed a disability and also cited that their disability was the focus of the way they were treated. So targets found that they were most likely to be bullied by the direct line manager, 55%. Not a huge surprise. If I've got 8,050 hours, the person I'm going to be most exposed to will be my line manager. This image in front of you is the image of the concept of culture. And what I've done is replicated it. So we've got 5 mid-blue concentric rings talking about values, beliefs, and symbols. Because what's really important here from the research is that a direct line manager has a disproportionate impact on people's experience of work. What does this mean for organisational culture? What it means is that just because an organisation is, in the majority of cases, on board and supportive of inclusion and access, all it needs is one line manager in their space not believing that to affect an individual's experience of work. So my experience of the Museums Association is affected by my line manager's behaviour and sense of own personal values, prejudice and discrimination. And this is why understanding the fact that what we might see in an organisation isn't the full picture, and what does that mean for how we work with the people that we work with. So I'm now going to give a little bit more detail, so a bit of detail from the people that responded, and I'm just highlighting a content warning in a similar way to Sam did, around that you might find that some of this content is upsetting from a lived experience perspective. So what we know from the research is that 25% of respondents felt they were bullied as a result of a protected characteristic, most commonly gender, then followed by age, and then disability. So in terms of people's response to the questionnaire that we sent out, 22% of all respondents, so 113 people completed this questionnaire, disclosed a disability as part of our respondent profile. So that is a high level of engagement in terms of this research, which may lead us to believe that this is only part of the picture if we were going to extrapolate our findings to other areas of work. And 17% of respondents, 19 people in total, cited specifically that their disability was the focus of their bullying. So they gave us qualitative information, they gave us comments about that. For example, individuals felt that they were mocked for having dyslexia. They felt their chronic ill health became the target. There were nasty remarks about my mental health, my intelligence, my attitude. Being neurodivergent was a target. I was targeted as an easy scapegoat, as I have a mental health issue. I was targeted for my need for reasonable adjustments as a disabled person. So we can spend a lot of time getting people in and doing everything that we want to do, but unless we really address how people are treated when they come into the organisational setting, then there's a risk to these individuals and the sector as a whole. In terms of bullying behaviours, and bullying behaviours are any behaviours that have a negative or detrimental impact, and there is a whole list the behaviours that we asked people to reflect upon. And I'm going to share that list now and read it out. So these are accepted examples of behaviours that would constitute bullying. But remember, we're talking about sustained and malevolent and detrimental impact. So minimising role and contribution, downplaying suggestions and ideas, limiting access to essential information, being overly critical of work without justification and or micromanagement, controlling contacts with professional colleagues, so forbidding contact with others, behaving aggressively, unnecessarily in changing priorities, humiliating staff, projecting blame, being a scapegoat, not responding to emails, questions or phone calls. So this is just some of the examples of behaviours that would constitute bullying behaviours, and these were the behaviours that were experienced by our respondents based on their lived experience of disability within an organisation. In terms of departing, 44% of respondents said that they would stop working in their organisation, and 11% said that they left the sector. And this is why this perpetuates perhaps those more ingrained, entrenched beliefs that this is not, you know, oh, well, this happened to Tamsin, so, you know, why are we going to do this again? And it creates that prejudice narrative that completes. So we need to make sure we address this. There were absolutely high instances of bullying having a negative impact on people's psychological and physical health. 95% of people said it affected their psychological health. 75% of respondents said it affected their physical health. That's really important when we're looking at this through a disability lens, because we have individuals working within the sector that have existing psychological, mental health or physical issues as part of their lived experience. But in addition, what we found in terms of this research is that the bullying within the sector then created an acquired impact. So people said that this meant that there was long-term health impacts, long-term mental health issues around the experience that they had. So not only are we, by having a negative and non-inclusive environment, amplifying pre-existing conditions, but we are supporting acquisition of additional trauma to individuals that have experienced bullying. What does that mean in terms of their advocacy around whether this sector is a good, healthy place to work? And then what does that mean about attracting people for traineeships? Like Esther has talked about, if there is an underlying sense that our sector is not accepting and inclusive. There was certainly a lack of awareness of trust and informal policies and procedures. And again, that all stems from that organisational culture. So if an organisation is saying one thing, but our experience is a different thing, if there's that disconnect, that lack of authenticity, then people are less likely to be able to then follow the procedures that have been put in place to help them. And what we know from the research is only 13% of respondents raised a formal grievance or followed it up formally, 8% having facilitated meetings with their managers. We also know that 90% of respondents were not satisfied with any of these outcomes. Now, this is, I'm painting a really not particularly rosy picture of the sector, but I think it's important that we understand what we're trying to deal with, because unless we understand how the representation and the involvement within the sector is, then how can we then look to affect change in terms of external engagement? So I'm now going to pause, and my buzzer should go off in a minute, because I want you to move into your own spaces, your own breakout spaces, and Rebecca will facilitate that. So how are we going to work in those breakout spaces, those confidential spaces? Let me just talk you through. Again, your presence is welcomed and we care about your well-being. You will be allocated a breakout room. But if you don't want to join it, then don't, decline. You will automatically return to the main room, and you can leave your camera off and put yourself on mute. Or if you want to, just leave the meeting and rejoin again in 10 minutes. We'll be coming back into the main group just after past. The questions that follow on the next slide are prompts only, and we're not going to be doing open feedback. Unlike other groups, you can choose to actively participate or listen. So please, if there's someone in the group that's not saying anything, that is their decision, and that is absolutely fine. And of course, throughout any of this discussion, you can leave the breakout room. So I'm conscious I've given you lots of content around the state of the sector. And these are some of the things I'd like you to think about and explore. And this will be shared to you in your groups. So what have you seen or experienced in an inclusive culture? What would you like to see or experience in an inclusive culture? Where does your organisation sit between their rhetoric and the reality you face and see? What can you do in your role to support a positive organisational reality? And what does this mean for your own professional practice? How can you support your co-workers? How essentially are we going to shift that culture? What are we going to do differently? So I'm going to stop sharing my slides. I'm going to hand over to Rebecca, who will create the breakout rooms, and I will see you back in about 10 minutes or so to follow up on the last few slides.
Thanks, Tamsin. And just a reminder that if anyone requires closed captioning, to not join a breakout room and come back to the main room, and ideally leave your cameras on. And I'm hoping this is going to work automatically this time, so fingers crossed.
I think you were talking about working from home, certainly in transformation.
Yeah, no, Pierrette and I were just riffing
about
about what an inclusive culture needs to look like moving forward to accommodate the ways that we found the softer edges of and being more well,
but
being
also
allowed to be home and being a bit more comfortable.
Having this, you know, having wonderful access to closed captions for people who can't hear. And we have a team member who
yeah, but also for people with fatigue like myself and pain.
Well, yes,
I rely on it too. So it is.
Yes,
you know,
no, exactly.
Isn't it? Yeah. Thank you, Claire, and great conversation, Pierre.
I don't know how I suddenly, I mean, I was just whisked out and I just...
here. That's fine. Well, we're all together now. So I'm going to hand over back to Tamsin for a wee bit to bring her session to a...
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And thank you certainly for in my group for discussions and reflections. And thank you for sort of sharing and listening. I know it can be quite hard, you know, at the end of the day, or at the last part. So let me just share. So thank you for all of the breakouts. Ultimately, what you have started doing is exploring your own recommendations. So the screen that we have in front of us is a screen outlining the levels of influence, I suppose, that we would expect that institutions take to ensure that their space is inclusive and not excluding based on the research that we talked about. And so those recommendations are for the sector and organisations, including funders, the line managers or leaders, and that's some of you in the space and some of you here, thank you. The targets, and we thought long and hard around, is there an undue burden on the individuals that have been targeted by these bullying behaviours? For peers and colleagues, so again, we all have a role to create a more inclusive environment and feeling comfortable about what we do. And then finally, we had some recommendations specifically for the perpetrators. So what you'll see on the right-hand side of the screen is a screenshot of the Sticks and Stone landscape document, which is essentially the recommendations table for all of those areas, for the sector and organisation, for line managers and leaders, for targets, for peers or colleagues, and also for perpetrators. And the reason the perpetrators are there is that we wanted to ensure that if we were going to have this conversation, we needed to have this conversation with everyone around the table, because that's how we affect change, is us all having that conversation. So those are some of the recommendations. Have a look, there's only 28. They're not hugely rocket science, but my experience of working in this field is that I don't think any of this is rocket science. And that's part of my frustration, is that in terms of moving sectors on, it is about being kind, it is about being thoughtful, it's about being human. So you have already started thinking about your role, perhaps as a line manager or as a leader, as a peer or a colleague. And, you know, whilst Mark did talk about the fact that, you know, that sticky middle and being a change maker, an individual in an organisation, I do still truly believe, and this is the slide about subcultures again, is I do truly believe that we can create our own subcultures. So we can change the experience of the people that we touch. You know, if we own our own behavior, if we use our agency, you know, if we be that change we want to see, if we be that role model for late adopters. So we might all be early adopters. I often find coming to sessions like this is we're talking to people that already know this and sign up to it. You know, it's the people that aren't at this session that need to be at the session. But actually, how can we be role models for those later adopters that need to see it have some quick wins, some successes before they think this is actually something that we can continue? And I do truly believe that there is a concept of critical mass and that we will reach that tipping point. And I think, you know, there are lots of things that we can do. So what's that look like? What else can we do? So I think commit to continued action and don't give up. And I think that's really hard, isn't it? When you're thinking, we had a conversation in an earlier session where someone said, you know, I've been doing all of this, but it's not moving on. I can safely say, having worked in the sector for 20 years, every single thing we are doing is a step in the right direction. Now, that isn't transformational change, but it is a step in the right direction. We're in a different place now than I was when I joined the sector 20 years ago. And this is a long game. We have this research, so please signpost it to people that will be perhaps the burning platform around this. This will be their wake-up call to realise that we need to do something about it. And we do have a wellbeing hub that has open source content. So whether you're a member or not a member, there is some guidance and some resources available. Read the recommendations and reflect on your own professional practice or your organisational practice, and challenge and call out poor practice constructively. Find your words, find your script, be able to do that so that you're not struggling for those words in the moment. That I know if I see somebody not behaving appropriately, I have a sentence that I will share. Continue these conversations with your colleagues and teams. Continue research into bullying and ableism within your organisation. Or if you have a staff survey, an engagement survey, exit surveys, whatever it might be, just make sure this doesn't fall off the agenda. Because my reflection on the sector at the moment is there is so much going on. There are so many important areas that we need to be active about. Climate crisis, Black Lives Matter, anti-racism, anti-ableism is also part of that agenda, and we need to make sure that it still has purchase. So finally, my reflections is that we all have a role to play in creating an inclusive culture. We have a collective responsibility to act to affect change. We absolutely need to break down the barriers, challenges and prejudices that exist at the recruitment and selection stage. But we also need to ensure that this commitment, these ethical, moral and legal imperatives continue beyond that, beyond hour one in an organisation. You know, 8,050 hours to be precise from my own personal experience. And by doing this, by affecting internal representation and experience, we should then ultimately affect external engagement and inclusion and talk about the things that Sam's talked about, that Rana's talked about, that Hannah talked about earlier on, around how we make sure that our museum spaces absolutely are inviting, inclusive and participative. Workforce reputation is part of that journey, and ensuring that people feel safe, secure and supported in your organisation is the first step. Thank you very much, and I'll stop sharing my slides.
Thank you so much, Tamsin. That was just so informative. And I think in the chat, there's the link to the research paper. Is it in different formats as well, or is it just a PDF? Is it a Word document available too?
So the research is placed on our web page in its fullest most, so on a web page, and then there is a 2-page PDF, and the Word document should be there as well, but I will double check.
That would be great. Thank you. Thanks so much. Yes, so yeah, it goes back really to us, you know, that idea of allies and accomplices. And I love the idea of having a script, because I think it is very much in the moment when you think, oh, should I be interjecting? This doesn't feel right. You know, what is the script that you can rely on to either support or defend yourself, or support someone else. So that idea of being, yeah, an ally, but also otherwise, are we not an accomplice somehow in the bullying if we let these things go by? Brilliant. I'm so pleased for this because it's such an important piece of research to bounce all of our planning and thinking around inclusive culture. So I'm going to ask Esther to come into the space, and we're going to spend the next 15 minutes really just talking and asking questions of ourselves, I guess, and also for people out there who would like to pose some questions. I did notice a first one for a question for both of you in the Google Doc. Rebecca, can you access that? I think it was about the nature of contracts, low paid jobs, fixed term contracts. Could you relay that to us?
I will do so. Let me just pin myself so people can see me as well. Hi. Yes, it was about recruitment, about fixed term contracts, often often low paid and inexpensive places to live. And the question was about whether there was support, or whether there could be support for applicants who have barriers to move into a new city, for example, helping them to find somewhere to live, support from health and social services, etc. So there was a question around whether you've seen that in practice, perhaps, whether that was something that you think would support or see as necessary.
It was that for both, it was, I think, really, in terms of, yeah. Esther, what's your thinking around that?
I can only talk from my own lived experience, I suppose, to that question, which is that I faced that probably 20 years ago when I got offered a position with the BBC, but there was no recruitment relocation available, and it was for 6 months. And I said, well, how am I going to move my whole care team to London with no support, no housing, nothing? I just can't take it because I can't move there like that. And that was, well, it's probably more than 20 years ago, actually, more like 25 years ago. So I don't know whether anything's changed, but I haven't really seen that anything has significantly changed in terms of a whole package that covers that. And I think, it's incredibly challenging because that's something that we'd probably love to do with Curating for Change, to offer a whole relocation package, but to have the budget to do that is obviously a big challenge. So what we're trying to look at is finding ways to ensure, like, some of the things like access to work are in place, that we've got a whole range of museums across England so that there are different location sites. So it's not just always London, or it's not just always Birmingham, or it's not just always the big cities, but there's a spread of people involved so that there are a range of locations that people might be able to kind of connect to the project. But yeah, I don't think I've really got an answer, I'm afraid.
It's interesting. Sorry, Tamsin.
Just a few things. I think relocation packages, which traditionally have been associated with senior roles, have gone by the wayside in general. But at a senior role, guess what? You have the money to be able to afford to do that move anyway yourself. Always seemed to be a little bit ironic, really, that that's where the money was focused. But hey ho. I think there is something around an opportunity, certainly from the Museums Association. So we do have a benevolent fund. So there are different elements of that. And as a Museums Association member, the benevolent fund ring fence for hardship would potentially be part of that. So, you could apply to the benevolent fund for relocation, but there's also that chicken and the egg thing, isn't it? About, do you apply for relocation if you accept the job, or do you accept the job and then reapply for that thing? But that's certainly an area for exploration, and maybe have that exploration in principle whilst you're applying. I mean, I truly am hopeful that, this shift to remote working, where there are positives, and I know that it's not everybody's positive experience, that this need to relocate for all the jobs, because there is a sense of ableist presenteeism, will go. So I'm hoping that also will be the antidote to some of those challenges around fixed term or short term contracts that are lowly paid.
Yeah, I think it was something that Esther was saying as well, also about, how can a job opportunity be designed differently? And in the group that I was just in, talking with Pierrette around, for a lot of us, it's been really great spending time at home and not having to go to a city centre or go to work consistently, and just have ended up feeling a little bit more healthy. And everyone's had to do it. So everyone's had to perform and do well, whether they're senior management or working as a volunteer in these virtual spaces. So it is possible. So it's about not that being about, which it was, as Lester was saying, before it was seen as less than, or, why are you asking that? That's not the way we do things. Rather than an inclusive culture allows for that blending and for people to have choice within that, and that there's not sort of any bias, or if everybody in a sense has an opportunity to do that, so it isn't just by virtue of impairment, though absolutely specifically giving people what they need in order to do their job well, that comes from having that lived experience. Are there any other questions that are coming through, Rebecca?
There's a question, really a practical question, I think, about interviews that I think is probably aimed at Esther, although Tamsin may want to add her advice as well, because I know it's another area of her expertise, but really about, there's a lot of questions in here, but I'll try and encapsulate them, about how much notice you would give candidates of questions. Would you give it to everyone by default, or just candidates that request them in advance? How would you deal with questions that test candidates' knowledge? You don't give them too much time to get that perfect answer. So I just wondered about, there's a bit more practical advice you can give museums on really how to make those interviews as accessible as possible.
I suppose one thing, and I noticed it in the chat actually, was to say that this isn't to try and give people an unfair advantage. It's about actually making sure that they have as level playing field as they can during that interview process. And I think, that's something that we've got to really be mindful of when we're talking about giving questions in advance. So I think that's just a really key thing to kind of keep hold of in our minds. And I think it's an access requirement like anything else. Like if you request BSL interpretation or a wheelchair access, or any of those things. So I'd really encourage us to keep that in our thoughts when we're thinking about questions in advance. And Tamsin, obviously you got your hand up, so you want to come in at that point.
Yeah,
I just think the argument about not sending things out in an appropriate amount of time is all based on an organisation ultimately not trusting their candidates. So if the organisation doesn't trust the people that are going to come and work for them, then that is a flawed organisation. So it's coming from a position of lack of trust and essentially lack of respect and contempt for the people that are applying for those jobs. I always follow the lead for applicants, but I always make sure that applicants know what is on offer. So I might well say, do you have any additional needs? And then I'll go back again when I finalise things and say, because these are some of the things we could do, because sometimes people just don't know what's available. So I can send questions out in advance. I can I can give you time to write questions down. You can take notes in. I think there's also something to remember that interviews ultimately are extrovert biased. So we know the research around interviews, if they are extrovert biased, they're biased where English isn't a second language. They're biased because there's in the moment responses that could have issues in terms of processing and communication areas. So we should move away from an interview only approach, because what that does is it doesn't afford all candidates a level playing field. It affords those individuals that can think in the moment, speak in the moment, an unfair advantage. So there is something about looking at, if we are testing knowledge, does that have to be face to face? Can that not be, if it's knowledge acquisition or knowledge, just get people to do a quick quiz or test around something in a separate space? And also the extent to which we still are sort of thinking about the fact that we have to have all of this knowledge here all of the time. I'm of a generation where you have what's the word? You'd have to look at the Encyclopedia Britannica to get information from back in the day. We don't do that now. We can get access to information at the touch of a button. So what is this obsession with knowledge that's here in the moment under pressure? Which is also another thing we need to think about in terms of interviews, that they are, by the very nature, pressurized environments that mean that lots of people will not be able to perform as well. But it's so easy to fix.
I know,
all it needs is someone to think about it.
Yeah, I think just to say that, oops, it's clipping up. Rach Anstey Sanders was saying, considering that the purpose of recruitment is seeing the candidate at their best, the reliance on traditional interviews is astonishing. Absolutely. And then Pierrette saying, you know, if reasonable adjustments, if there was a lot more relaxed, it's still people feel guilty for asking for what they need, which is their fundamental right, because the costs, and that then is left with the therefore disabled neurodivergent applicant to feel that sort of sense of burden, and that's not useful. I would like to ask you both, I think Esther first, what would be the single most important thing you feel that people here in this room should encourage and think about in themselves or their own organisations to make recruitment more representative and successful for disabled applicants?
I think if it was just one word, it would probably be flexibility, because it's flexibility in everything. It's flexibility in how people make the application. It's flexibility in how you let them show what their full potential is. How are they going to do that interview? So yeah, flexibility for me.
Yeah, wonderful. And I guess that flexibility, and also how you put out the opportunity. It was so wonderful, your slide deck, the different ways in which you present yourself. So it's not focused just on the people applying, but who are we? What is our culture?
Exactly, yeah.
I love that flexibility. So if we can all think more flexibly, what are the things that we'll be flexible about, specifically around our work? And I guess then a question for you, Tamsin, would be about, in the light of what you've shared with us, you know, what is the single thing that is going to mean that people will stay and be part of organisational culture? So retaining disabled folk as part of this, or anyone with a background who's really had to struggle to be there, and there's less representation of them. How do we keep people with our organisations and stop them from leaving?
I think thank you for that question. I mean, one thing is be a good ally. Don't be complicit. Call out that behaviour, so they know that they've been seen and they know that they're cared about, and they're not an annoyance, and they're not an aberration, whatever they are being led to believe by the people that aren't treating them well.
Yeah, that's so great. One of the conversations that we heard, that, look, you know, something I said at the beginning, we've all gone through and are going through a particular time, and the fallout on all of us means that an inclusive culture is absolutely paramount for us moving forward altogether, for our cultural landscape. It really is, and it's going to become increasingly more so. Nick, I can see you've got your hand up there. I can just see it because you're on my screen. Would you like to come in here with a question that you have? Yes, I see you've got your hand up, or was it a mistake? It's just because I can see you.
Yeah, no, it's because I'm not good with technology and I don't know.
It's all right. Okay.
Do you have a question about?
Yeah.
Oh, so I just want to ask about people who have become disabled. So a lot of the conversation has been about getting a job or getting things going. But if you've lived, a life without disability and then have become disabled in the middle of your career, how do you get your employer to see that you're not going to work the same way as you did before? It just, especially if you have mobility issues like I do now, and I did it before. I could run around before, now I can't. So how do you get them to see those, but then also see that you still have value and you still have something to offer? It's just a different offer, because I feel like I'm constantly having to apologize for that I can't be the person that I was, but then
absolutely
really angry that I do. So
and Nick, thank you for your question, and you know, it's something I think that's going to come up for more people as the shifts and changes and the experiences they've had, particularly over this last year. Esther, can I come to you? What would you have to say about this, particularly at this time?
Well, actually, I was in quite a privileged position that I was in the breakout room with Nick. So I heard her say some of it, and it really resonated with me, because I think you said, Nick, I would really like to be valued for what I do now and who I am now, and the the skills that and experiences that I offer now. And I thought that was so true. You know, it's really about everything that that person still offers and still brings, and to really try and move away from this sort of idea of disability being a deficit, because I think that's the problem. It's so ingrained, this sort of deficit model, and actually also that it's really about ensuring that your team members or your line managers or whoever can actually support you to be the best that you can be in your role. So it's a responsibility for them as well, I think, to ensure that they're kind of not failing you and giving you that support. And yeah, so I think to have a transition in the middle of a career is obviously something that would take a lot of sort of dialogue and discussion, but really valuing you I think is sort of the key thing that I'd like to highlight for people.
Yeah, and it sort of echoes back, and Nick, I can see that touches you, but a lot of people, you know, with you in this respect, and those changing set of circumstances that happened in my professional life are completely changed. And so that you're not alone in just seeing the value of that. But it's what Hannah was saying this morning about disability gain. You know, just that lived experience, you are part of the inclusive culture. And whilst the labour shouldn't be with you, you know, it's really important that we hold shifts and changes, because it's going to happen for a lot more of us, and has happened already through this last year. So we're nearly at an end. So thank you, Tamsin and Esther. I'd just like to bring this brilliant day to a close and to thank everybody who's contributed and worked so hard, particularly Rebecca, extraordinary input, and all the wonderful people who gave of their lived experience and shared so many resources. And I said at the beginning of the day that I would love you to share in the chat, for those who are still with us, what your one move is going to be, your inclusive move, as you leave this space. What are you going to do? What are you going to start? We've started thinking about do tomorrow or in the next week or month, to make what your inclusive culture for yourself, as Tamsin was saying, but also the organisation within you work. So yeah, if we could just share those. We're going to be around for a little bit, I should imagine. I'm sure some of you are going to race off, just to check that you're all okay if you're feeling, because obviously some of these things are difficult to talk about. We'll be here for a few minutes more, and thank you, everybody. Thank you. Any final thoughts to share, or shall I just?
I'm just going to just remind. Yeah, no, there's no. I just want to say thank you, Sarah, for holding the day together, and it's worth saying to everyone that had a big input into shaping the day. So thank you so much for everything. And I know I've said it on chat and people have messaged me, but what I'm going to do is email access to the slides, the chat, and the recording, but it won't be till Monday because I do it like Fridays. But and it takes quite a while to download it off Zoom. But I'll try and do it tonight if I can. But if not, it'll be Monday. And I hope that's okay. But everyone's got my email address, so you can contact me in the meantime if you need something urgently. And thank you for the input into chat and the breakouts as well, because I know it's quite a big contribution that everyone makes.
Absolutely. So just pop in the chat if you feel like it. One thing you're going to move forward with an inclusive word, and then we can all have a nice cup of tea or an early beverage. Yeah, it's hard. It's hard being in a Zoom all day, and I know I denied you your break in the morning, which was a bit sacrilege of me, as I'm Madam Rest. But there you go. Brilliant, lovely to see. Glass of wine, yes, for Tamsin.
Absolutely.
Lovely to see all those things.
So I'm going to bring the meeting to an end now. Thanks again, everybody. And yeah, do keep in touch, and I'll be in touch next week with all the recordings and additional information. And thanks again to all our speakers and to Sarah and to delegates. So I can see some virtual clapping. Bye.